The fluorescent lights of the convenience store buzzed overhead as Marcus Hayes wiped down the register counter for the third time that hour. His shift manager had been clear about keeping the checkout area spotless, even though the Sunday evening crowd had dwindled to almost nothing. Outside, the Seattle rain drummed against the plate glass windows, turning the parking lot into a mirror of neon reflections and pooling water. Marcus was midway through his repetitive task when the door chimed, admitting a gust of cold November air and a small figure that barely came up to the candy rack. The boy couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old, wearing a jacket that had seen better years and sneakers with holes that let in the rain. His dark hair was plastered to his forehead, and he carried a small plastic bag clutched against his chest like it contained something precious. The child moved through the store with the deliberate caution of someone who had learned to make himself invisible. He stopped at the discount shelf where day-old sandwiches sat in plastic containers marked down to $3. His small fingers traced the labels, reading each one carefully, before selecting a turkey sandwich that looked slightly less wilted than the others. Marcus watched from behind the counter as the boy approached, placing the sandwich on the conveyor belt with both hands, as if afraid it might escape. Then came the moment that would etch itself into Marcus's memory forever. The child reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the plastic bag, unzipping it with fingers that trembled slightly from cold or nervousness or both. Inside were coins. Dozens of them. Pennies mostly, with a few nickels and dimes scattered through the copper sea. The boy began counting them onto the counter with painstaking care. 1 penny. 2 pennies. 3 pennies. His lips moved silently as he tracked the amount, creating small piles of 10 to keep his place. Marcus stood perfectly still, something tightening in his chest as he watched this child transform his entire fortune into neat little towers of copper. When the counting finished, the boy looked up with eyes that held too much knowledge for someone so young. $2.43 lay on the counter in precise stacks. The sandwich cost $3.17 after tax. The child knew this before Marcus said anything. The resignation in his small face made that clear. Marcus had opened his mouth to tell the boy he was short when the store's entrance chimed again. This time, a woman entered, followed by an entourage that seemed to fill the small convenience store with energy and purpose. She was perhaps 40, with dark hair pulled back in a style that probably cost more than Marcus made in a week, wearing a business suit that looked out of place among the lottery tickets and energy drinks. 3 people trailed behind her, 2 men in similar professional attire and a younger woman with a tablet, all of them moving with the coordinated efficiency of a team used to working together. Marcus recognized her immediately, though he'd only seen her face in the local business section of the newspaper. Alexandra Sterling, CEO of Sterling Properties, the development company that owned half the commercial real estate in Seattle, including the building that housed this very convenience store. She was in the middle of a crisis, if the tense set of her shoulders and the rapid-fire conversation with her associates was any indication. Something about a property inspection that had gone catastrophically wrong. A building scheduled to open in 6 hours for a major corporate client, except the HVAC system had failed completely and the backup wasn't working either. Marcus caught fragments of the conversation as he stood frozen behind the counter, the small boy and his pennies temporarily forgotten in the wake of this storm of expensive suits and urgent voices. The younger woman with the tablet was pulling up contractor numbers, but Alexandra waved her off with visible frustration. 2 specialists had already been to the building, she said, her voice carrying the particular edge that came from money and power meeting an obstacle they couldn't immediately remove. Neither could figure out what was wrong. The system should be working but it wasn't, and the client was threatening to walk, taking a multi-million-dollar contract with them. Marcus shouldn't have been paying attention. He should have been ringing up the sandwich for the small boy who was gathering his pennies back into the plastic bag with shaking hands, clearly understanding he wouldn't be eating tonight. But something about the technical details Alexandra was rattling off caught Marcus's ear and held it. She mentioned the building's address. The model number of the HVAC system. The symptoms of the failure. And Marcus knew, with the certainty that came from 12 years of specialized training and 8 years of practical experience, exactly what was wrong and how to fix it. He knew because before he became a convenience store clerk making $11 an hour, before the small apartment and the old Toyota and the life that revolved around simply surviving day to day, Marcus Hayes had been Staff Sergeant Marcus Hayes, United States Air Force, specializing in environmental control systems for military aircraft and ground installations. He had worked on systems 10 times more complex than any commercial HVAC unit, had been deployed to bases where a failed environmental control system meant people died, had earned commendations for being able to diagnose problems that left other specialists baffled. But that was before. Before the call that came at 2 in the morning 3 years ago. Before the drunk driver who ran a red light and killed his wife Sarah instantly. Before he made the choice to take early separation from the Air Force because his daughter Lily, then 5 years old and suddenly without a mother, needed a parent who could be there every day, not someone deployed overseas for months at a time. Marcus had set down his tools and his rank and everything that came with them, and he had taken the first job that would let him work nights while Lily was with her grandmother during the day. It didn't matter that he was overqualified. It didn't matter that he could have found something better if he'd been willing to move or travel or be away from home for extended periods. Nothing mattered except being there when Lily woke up from nightmares about her mother, being there to make her breakfast and walk her to school and prove that she hadn't lost everyone. The pennies clinked softly as the small boy swept them back into his bag. Marcus refocused on him, pushing away the memories and the impossible knowledge that he could solve Alexandra Sterling's problem in less than 2 hours if he still had access to his tools. The boy was zipping the bag closed, preparing to leave without his sandwich, and Marcus made a decision that had nothing to do with corporate crises and everything to do with the look in those two old eyes. He was reaching under the counter for his wallet when Alexandra's voice cut through the store with sudden, sharp focus. She was looking directly at him, her gaze intense in a way that made Marcus understand why she ran a multi-million-dollar company at her age. She had noticed him noticing. Had seen the recognition in his face when she mentioned the technical details. "You," she said, and it wasn't a question. "You know something about HVAC systems." Marcus could have denied it. Could have shaken his head and focused on the boy and the sandwich and kept his old life where it belonged, buried and inaccessible. But before he could respond, one of the men in her entourage laughed. Not a kind laugh. A dismissive sound that carried all the weight of expensive education and assumptions about people who wore name tags on their shirts. "What's he going to know about it?" the man said, gesturing toward Marcus with the kind of casual contempt that came from never having been on the receiving end of it. "He works at a convenience store." Alexandra held up one hand, silencing her associate, but her eyes never left Marcus. Her expression was calculating now, measuring, and Marcus recognized that look too. It was the look of someone who played games with people's dignity because they could, because power gave them permission, because winning was the only thing that mattered. "I'll make you a deal," she said, and the store went very quiet. Her team stopped their sidebar conversations. Even the boy with the pennies looked up, sensing something significant happening in the fluorescent-lit space between the candy racks and the coffee station. "Fix my HVAC system in the next 4 hours. Get it working perfectly before the client inspection at midnight. Do that, and I'll give you $10,000. Cash. Tonight." The number hung in the air like a physical thing. $10,000. That was 8 months of rent. That was the dental work Lily needed that Marcus's minimal insurance wouldn't cover. That was the after-school art program she desperately wanted to attend but they couldn't afford. That was security and breathing room and everything Marcus had been struggling to provide for 3 years. But there was more coming. Marcus could see it in the way Alexandra's expression shifted, became something harder and colder and designed to wound. "If you fail," she continued, her voice dropping into a register that made the offer sound like a threat, "you kiss me. Right here. In front of everyone. And I film it and post it everywhere, so the whole city can see the convenience store clerk who thought he could play engineer." The man who had laughed before laughed again, harder this time. The others in Alexandra's team shifted uncomfortably but said nothing, and Marcus understood that this was some kind of test or game or power play that had nothing to do with him and everything to do with whatever dynamics drove these people in their expensive suits. He should have said no immediately. Should have recognized the humiliation built into the structure of the bet, the way she had designed it so that even if he won, he lost his dignity in accepting such terms. But Marcus looked at the small boy with his bag of pennies, looked at the child who was trying to count coins for a $3 sandwich, and he thought about Lily. He thought about the drawing she had shown him that morning, the one she'd done for the school art competition using broken crayons and notebook paper because they couldn't afford proper art supplies. The competition was tonight. Right now, probably, while Marcus was here wiping down counters and watching children count pennies. Lily was at her grandmother's house, working on her submission in the dim lighting of the kitchen table because they didn't have the proper lamps or the good paper or the colored pencils the other kids had. She had been so proud of her drawing, had asked Marcus if she could go to the art program if she won, and Marcus had smiled and said maybe, knowing that maybe meant no, knowing that they couldn't afford the $100 monthly fee no matter how talented his daughter was. But $10,000. That would pay for the program. That would buy the supplies. That would let Lily have something that was hers, something that didn't come with the weight of compromise and sacrifice and making do with less. Marcus looked at Alexandra Sterling and her cruel game, and he made a choice that he knew might destroy what remained of his pride but might also give his daughter a chance. 4 hours, he said quietly. I need access to the building and a basic toolkit. Alexandra smiled, but there was no warmth in it. She gestured to one of her associates, who pulled out a phone and began recording. Marcus understood that the humiliation was starting now, that this video would capture his agreement to terms designed to make him look desperate and foolish regardless of the outcome. If you fail, she repeated, making sure it was captured on camera, you kiss me. Right here. We film it. We post it. Everyone will know the name of the man who thought he was smarter than 2 licensed contractors. Marcus looked at her for a long moment. He thought about Lily's face when she showed him her drawings. He thought about Sarah and what she would say if she could see him now. Then he looked at the small boy with the pennies, who was watching this entire exchange with wide eyes, and Marcus made a decision that had less to do with the money and more to do with proving to at least one child in this store that sometimes the world could surprise you. I accept, Marcus said, and he watched something flicker across Alexandra's face that might have been satisfaction or disappointment or both. The recording stopped. Alexandra's team began moving immediately, coordinating transportation and access to the building. The man who had laughed pulled up the address on his phone, already calling ahead to building security. But before Marcus could move from behind the counter, before he could begin the process of retrieving his tools from where they sat gathering dust in his apartment closet, he looked at the small boy who still stood there with his sandwich and his pennies. Marcus reached under the counter and pulled out his wallet. He took out a $20 bill, one of 3 he had until his next paycheck, and he placed it on the counter next to the sandwich. Get yourself dinner, Marcus said quietly. Real dinner. And keep your pennies for something else. The boy stared at the money like it might disappear if he looked away. Then he looked up at Marcus with an expression that held disbelief and hope and something that might have been the beginning of tears. Thank you, the child whispered, gathering the 20 with careful hands. Marcus nodded once and stepped out from behind the counter, leaving the store manager's number with his co-worker to explain his sudden departure. As he followed Alexandra and her team out into the rain, Marcus caught his reflection in the glass door. He barely recognized the man staring back, this person who had agreed to public humiliation for the chance to help his daughter. But he recognized the determination in that reflection's eyes, and he held on to that as he climbed into the back of Alexandra's Mercedes and began the journey toward 4 hours that would change everything. Drop a comment below and let everyone know where you're watching this story unfold from. Are you here from New York? London? Somewhere completely unexpected? The community would love to know. Marcus Hayes had not always been a convenience store clerk who flinched at the sound of the door chime and counted hours until his shift ended. There had been a time, not so long ago by the calendar but an entire lifetime ago by every other measure, when he had been someone else entirely. Someone who wore a uniform with 3 stripes and a proud history. Someone who could fix anything that broke, no matter how complex or critical or impossible it seemed to everyone else. He had been 32 years old when he enlisted, older than most recruits, driven by a need for structure after years of drifting through temporary construction jobs and failed attempts at college. The Air Force had seen something in him during the aptitude tests, something that suggested he could understand complex mechanical systems the way most people understood conversation. They had been right. Marcus took to environmental control systems the way some people took to music or mathematics, with an intuitive grasp that went beyond memorization and into genuine comprehension. By the time he was 35, he had achieved the rank of staff sergeant and specialized in the kind of systems that kept aircraft flying and military installations functioning in conditions that would kill people within hours if something went wrong. He worked on environmental controls for transport planes that flew through temperature extremes. He maintained life support systems for remote radar stations in Alaska where the outside air could freeze human tissue in under a minute. He had been deployed to Kuwait and Germany and South Korea, each assignment adding to his reputation as the specialist who could diagnose problems that baffled everyone else. He met Sarah at a 4th of July barbecue on base in 2019, back when the world still made sense and the future seemed like something you could plan for. She had been a teacher at the base elementary school, 28 years old with a laugh that lit up every room she entered and a patience that extended to everyone, from the most difficult students to the socially awkward airmen who could talk about HVAC systems for hours but struggled with small talk. They married 8 months later in a small ceremony at the base chapel. Lily was born 11 months after that, arriving 3 weeks early while Marcus was in the middle of a deployment, and he had held his daughter for the first time via video call from 8,000 miles away. Sarah had been understanding, had known what she was signing up for when she married someone in the military, but Marcus had seen the exhaustion in her eyes during those long deployments. Had heard the strain in her voice when she called at 3 in the morning her time because Lily was sick and she was alone and needed someone to tell her she was doing okay. But they had been happy. Marcus knew they had been happy. He had photos to prove it, tucked away in a box in his closet that he couldn't bring himself to throw away or display. Pictures of the three of them at the park, Lily on his shoulders while Sarah laughed at something he'd said. Christmas morning with Lily at 2 years old, drowning in wrapping paper and delight. Sarah's face when he came home from his last deployment, the way she had run across the tarmac and nearly knocked him over with the force of her embrace. The last good memory Marcus had was from May 2021. They were stationed at Joint Base Lewis McChord in Washington, and it was Sarah's birthday. Marcus had taken leave to spend the day with his family, and they had driven up to Seattle for dinner at a restaurant Sarah had been talking about for months. Lily had been 4 years old, chattering constantly about the Space Needle and the water and everything she saw out the car window. Sarah had reached across the console and squeezed Marcus's hand, and she had said the words that would haunt him for years afterward, "I'm so happy. Right now, in this moment, I am completely happy." 6 weeks later, she was dead. The call came at 2:17 in the morning. Marcus had been asleep in their base housing, Sarah beside him breathing softly, Lily in the room down the hall. The phone rang with the kind of insistence that meant nothing good, and Marcus had answered it to hear a police officer's voice explaining that there had been an accident. A drunk driver had run a red light doing 70 in a 35 zone. Sarah's car had been T-boned on the driver's side while she was returning from a late meeting at the school. She had died on impact, the officer said, as if that made it better. As if the speed of death somehow lessened the magnitude of loss. Marcus remembered very little of the weeks that followed. He remembered his commanding officer arriving at the house. He remembered his mother flying in from Ohio to help with Lily. He remembered the funeral with its flag-draped casket and the rifle salute that made his daughter cry because she didn't understand why the soldiers were shooting guns at Mommy's goodbye. But mostly he remembered the hollow feeling that settled into his chest and refused to leave, the sense that something fundamental had been removed from the universe and nothing would ever balance correctly again. The Air Force had been kind. They had offered him counseling and time off and the space to grieve. But Marcus couldn't do his job anymore. He would stand in front of control panels that had once made perfect sense to him, and his mind would go blank. He would pick up tools that had been extensions of his hands, and they felt foreign. 3 months after Sarah's death, Marcus requested early separation on the grounds of family hardship, and the Air Force, perhaps recognizing that he was broken in a way that desk work and counseling couldn't fix, had granted it. He had made the decision with Lily in mind. She was 5 years old and had just lost her mother. She couldn't lose her father too, not to deployments and bases and the demands of military life. Marcus's mother had offered to take Lily permanently, to raise her in Ohio while Marcus stayed in the Air Force and tried to rebuild his career, but Marcus had refused. Lily had already lost one parent. She deserved to keep the other. So Marcus had packed up their base housing. He had sold most of their furniture and Sarah's car and everything else that wouldn't fit into his old Toyota. He had moved them to Seattle because Lily had talked about the Space Needle for months after that last happy birthday, and Marcus couldn't give his daughter her mother back, but he could give her a connection to the last good day they'd had together. They had ended up in a one-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood that was safe but far from nice. Marcus slept on the couch. Lily got the bedroom, which he had painted her favorite color and filled with as many of her toys and books as he could manage. He took the first job he could find that would let him work nights while his mother came during the day to watch Lily, allowing Marcus to be there in the mornings and evenings when his daughter needed him most. That job was at the convenience store. $11 an hour. No benefits. No respect. No use for the decade of specialized training and experience he had earned in the Air Force. But it allowed him to wake Lily up for school, make her breakfast, walk her to the bus stop. It allowed him to be there when she came home, help with homework, make dinner, put her to bed. It allowed him to be the parent she needed, even if it meant being nothing else. His tools sat in the closet in boxes he hadn't opened in 3 years. The military-grade toolkit he had been allowed to purchase when he left the service. The specialized diagnostic equipment he had saved up for over years. The manuals and reference guides he had accumulated. All of it gathering dust because Marcus couldn't bring himself to throw them away but couldn't bear to use them either. Each tool was a reminder of who he used to be. Each piece of equipment was a connection to a life that had ended the night Sarah's car was hit. But Marcus hadn't completely abandoned his skills. He couldn't. They were too deeply ingrained, too fundamental to who he was beneath the grief and the exhaustion and the minimum wage job. So he volunteered. Twice a week, on his days off, Marcus went to a youth center in his neighborhood and taught basic mechanical skills to teenagers who needed something constructive to do. He showed them how to change oil and replace air filters and understand basic electrical systems. He taught them that tools were powerful things when you knew how to use them properly. And he watched Lily, his beautiful daughter who looked more like Sarah every day, develop the same mechanical aptitude that had defined Marcus's career. She was only 8 years old now, but she could disassemble and reassemble small appliances with frightening ease. She asked questions about how things worked, why circuits connected the way they did, what made engines run. She drew blueprints and schematics with the kind of precision that suggested the talent was inherited, passed down through some genetic miracle that Marcus didn't understand but deeply appreciated. Lily's current obsession was robotics. She had seen a demonstration at school and become instantly fascinated, spending every free moment sketching designs for robots that could help people. Her dream was to attend the Saturday Youth Robotics program at the Seattle Science Center, but the program cost $100 a month and required students to have their own basic toolkit. Marcus had looked into it, had even filled out the application, but when he saw the total cost including the required equipment, he had quietly put the forms away. They couldn't afford it. They could barely afford groceries and rent. But Lily didn't know that. Marcus had told her maybe, and she had accepted that answer with the kind of faith that children have in their parents' ability to make things work out. She had continued drawing her robots and planning her projects, confident that somehow, someday, she would get to build them for real. Tonight was her school art competition. The school hosted it annually, and winners in each age category received recognition and small scholarships toward summer programs. Lily had been working on her submission for weeks, a detailed technical drawing of a robot designed to help people with limited mobility. She had done it all with notebook paper and broken crayons and a level of determination that made Marcus's heart hurt. She had asked if she could go to the robotics program if she won, and Marcus had said maybe again, and she had hugged him and said that was good enough. Marcus knew she was at his mother's house right now, putting the final touches on her drawing under the inadequate lighting of the kitchen table. He knew she was probably wearing the dress Sarah had bought her 2 years ago, the one that was getting too short but that Lily loved because it had pockets. He knew she was thinking about him, hoping he was proud of her, trusting that he would make things work somehow. Every night before bed, Marcus performed the same ritual. He would wait until Lily was asleep, and then he would retrieve the photo from Sarah's funeral, the one where she was laughing at their wedding, her eyes bright with joy and future possibility. He would look at it for exactly 60 seconds, allowing himself to remember her voice and her warmth and the way she used to curl against him at night. Then he would put the photo back in its box and close the lid, because if he left it out, he would never stop looking, and if he never stopped looking, he would never move forward. But tonight, as Marcus prepared to retrieve his tools and attempt to fix Alexandra Sterling's HVAC system, he allowed himself to wonder what Sarah would say about the choice he had made. She would probably tell him he was being ridiculous, taking a bet designed to humiliate him for money they desperately needed. She would probably point out that there were other ways to help Lily, that dignity mattered, that teaching his daughter to accept degrading terms taught her the wrong lessons about self-worth. But Sarah had never had to choose between dignity and giving their daughter opportunities. She had never stood in a convenience store watching a child count pennies for food while knowing your own child was doing the same kind of desperate math with broken crayons and notebook paper. She had never felt the particular helplessness of being trained for something you could no longer do, of having skills that could change everything but no access to the circumstances that would let you use them. Marcus looked at himself in the bathroom mirror of his apartment, having stopped there to retrieve his tools. He was 38 years old but looked older, the lines around his eyes deeper than they should be, the gray at his temples more pronounced than seemed right. He barely recognized the staff sergeant who had once fixed environmental control systems in military installations around the world. That person had been confident and capable and certain of his place in the universe. The person staring back from the mirror was none of those things. But he was Lily's father. And tonight, he was going to be Lily's father who could afford the robotics program and the proper supplies and everything else she needed to turn her drawings into reality. Even if it cost him his pride. Even if it meant accepting a bet designed to break him. Even if it meant risking the public humiliation that Alexandra Sterling had dangled in front of him like poisoned bait. Marcus opened his closet and pulled out the boxes containing his tools. The weight of them in his hands was familiar and foreign at once, like encountering a childhood friend after decades of separation. He ran his fingers over the cases, feeling the scuff marks and wear patterns that told the story of a career he had walked away from. Then he carried them to his car, loaded them into the trunk, and drove toward the building where Alexandra Sterling waited with her crisis and her cameras and her cruel terms. 4 hours to fix what 2 licensed contractors couldn't. 4 hours to prove he was still worth something beyond minimum wage and wiped counters. 4 hours to earn the money that would give his daughter a chance. Marcus thought about Sarah one more time, allowing himself the luxury of imagining her beside him, her hand on his arm, her voice in his ear. Then he put the memory away, as he did every night, and drove into the rain toward whatever came next. Alexandra Sterling had not slept properly in 6 years, not since the phone call that informed her that her father had suffered a massive stroke during a board meeting and was not expected to survive the night. She had been 34 years old at the time, working as the company's chief operating officer, second in command but never quite trusted with real authority because her father believed that true leadership required the kind of ruthlessness that he wasn't certain his daughter possessed. He had been wrong about many things, but he had been right about that. Sterling Properties had been founded by Alexandra's grandfather in 1952, built from a single apartment building into a regional powerhouse that now controlled over $40 million in commercial real estate across Washington state. Her father, Richard Sterling, had inherited the company in 1989 and grown it aggressively, acquiring properties and leveraging them into larger holdings with the kind of calculated risk-taking that turned modest fortunes into substantial ones. Alexandra had grown up in that world. Her childhood home had been a mansion overlooking Puget Sound, with staff who maintained the grounds and prepared the meals and kept everything running so smoothly that Alexandra was an adult before she fully understood that most people didn't live that way. She had attended private schools where her last name opened doors before she spoke a word. She had gone to business school at Wharton because that was where Sterling family members went, and she had joined her father's company immediately after graduation because that path had been decided before she was old enough to have an opinion about it. Her mother had died when Alexandra was 9 years old. Cancer, the aggressive kind that didn't respond to treatment, that turned a vibrant woman into a ghost in a matter of months. Alexandra remembered very little about her mother except the smell of her perfume and the way she used to read bedtime stories with different voices for each character. After her death, Richard Sterling had removed her presence from the house with systematic efficiency. Photos came down. Personal items disappeared. The only thing that remained was Alexandra's own memory, which her father actively discouraged her from discussing. Grief is weakness, he had told his 9-year-old daughter at the funeral. The people who work for us can't see weakness. They'll use it against us. So we don't cry where anyone can see. We don't talk about feelings. We don't let anyone know that anything hurts. Alexandra had taken that lesson to heart. She had learned to perform competence and control so convincingly that she sometimes forgot she was performing. She excelled in school because failure would have revealed weakness. She became fluent in corporate strategy because not understanding would have exposed vulnerability. She dated rarely and married never because relationships required the kind of emotional availability that her father's training had made impossible. When Richard Sterling's stroke left him permanently incapacitated, the company's board of directors had no choice but to elevate Alexandra to CEO. She had been 34 years old, one of the youngest people to run a company of Sterling Properties size, and every single board member doubted her ability to do it. She could see it in their faces during that first meeting. The skepticism. The calculation. The barely concealed hope that she would fail quickly so they could replace her with someone they considered more suitable. That had been 6 years ago. 6 years of working 16-hour days. 6 years of making decisions that affected hundreds of employees and tens of millions of dollars. 6 years of proving repeatedly that she could do everything her father had done, but without the benefit of the respect that men in positions of power received automatically. Every contract negotiation was a battle to be taken seriously. Every acquisition was a test to see if she would falter. Every quarterly report was an opportunity for the board to second-guess her strategy. She had learned to armor herself in ruthlessness. It was the only thing that worked. She fired underperforming employees without hesitation because hesitation would be interpreted as weakness. She negotiated contracts with suppliers and tenants and contractors using every advantage she had because leaving money on the table would suggest she wasn't properly protecting company interests. She made public examples of people who failed her because her father had taught her that fear was more effective than respect. The bet she had made with Marcus Hayes at the convenience store was perfectly in character for the person Alexandra had become. She had needed a solution to an impossible problem, had recognized knowledge in someone unlikely, and had structured the transaction in terms that would demonstrate her dominance regardless of the outcome. If Marcus fixed the system, she paid him far less than she would have paid a licensed contractor for emergency work. If he failed, she got entertainment and content for her social media that would reinforce her image as someone not to be crossed. She hadn't considered that the terms might be cruel. Or rather, she had considered it and decided it didn't matter. Cruelty was just another tool in the arsenal of someone who needed to maintain control. Her father had taught her that people responded to strength and feared vulnerability, and 6 years of running Sterling Properties had confirmed the lesson again and again. Alexandra lived alone in a penthouse apartment that cost more per month than most people's annual salary. The space was decorated by a professional in shades of white and gray, every surface clean and every object precisely placed. There were no personal photographs. No mementos. No indication that anyone actually lived there beyond the coffee maker that got used every morning at 5:30 and the treadmill that got used every evening at 8. She had 3 contacts in her phone that could be considered personal, if she stretched the definition. Her executive assistant, who coordinated her schedule but with whom Alexandra had never had a conversation that wasn't professional. Her dentist, because dental hygiene mattered. And the woman who had been her roommate in college, who called twice a year and with whom Alexandra exchanged pleasantries before making excuses to end the call. Every night before bed, Alexandra stood in front of her bathroom mirror and practiced her expressions. She would smile and make sure it reached her eyes. She would frown and make sure it conveyed displeasure without revealing actual emotion. She would nod with interest while keeping her face neutral. She performed these exercises with the dedication of an athlete, because maintaining control of her presentation was the only thing standing between her and the exposure she feared most, that people would see through the armor and realize she had no idea what she was doing. The truth, which Alexandra admitted to herself only in the darkest hours of sleepless nights, was that she was terrified. Terrified that the board would find an excuse to remove her. Terrified that the company would fail on her watch and destroy the legacy her grandfather had built. Terrified that she would make a mistake large enough to prove all the doubters right. Every decision felt like standing on a cliff edge. Every day felt like a test she was barely passing. The HVAC crisis should have been a minor problem. A mechanical failure in a building scheduled to open for a major tenant, fixable with a phone call and a check large enough to motivate someone to work overnight. But 2 contractors had already failed, the client was threatening to walk, and the board would see it as evidence that Alexandra couldn't manage even basic property operations. So when she had walked into that convenience store looking for coffee to sustain her through another crisis-filled night, and she had recognized knowledge in the face of the clerk behind the counter, she had done what she always did, she had found an angle and exploited it. The bet had been designed to protect her. If Marcus succeeded, she got her problem solved cheaply and demonstrated that she could identify talent in unlikely places. If he failed, she got content that would make her look powerful and decisive, someone who called bluffs and punished pretension. Either way, she maintained control. She hadn't considered that Marcus might have a good reason for accepting such degrading terms. Hadn't thought about why someone with obvious technical knowledge would be working at a convenience store for minimum wage. Hadn't paused to wonder what it might cost someone to accept a bet structured to humiliate them regardless of the outcome. Alexandra Sterling, at 40 years old, was one of the most successful businesswomen in Seattle, running a company worth tens of millions of dollars, respected by her industry and feared by her employees. But she was also alone. Completely, devastatingly alone in a way that she couldn't acknowledge during business hours because acknowledging it would crack the armor she needed to survive. She thought about her father sometimes, in those rare moments when the armor slipped. Richard Sterling had died 2 years ago, never recovering from his stroke, spending his final years in a care facility where he could no longer speak or move or do anything except breathe. Alexandra had visited twice a month, sitting beside his bed and reporting on company performance, treating it like a board meeting because she didn't know how to talk to him any other way. At his funeral, she had stood beside his casket and felt nothing. Or rather, she had felt something but couldn't identify it, couldn't name the emotion that sat in her chest like a stone. One of the board members had approached her afterward and told her she was handling it well, with real composure, and Alexandra had thanked him for the compliment while wondering if composure was really what she should be feeling as she buried her last remaining parent. The mirror ritual she performed every night had started after her father's death. She had realized, standing in her sterile apartment on the night he died, that she couldn't remember the last time she had expressed genuine emotion where anyone could see it. Couldn't remember the last time she had laughed spontaneously or cried without permission or allowed herself to react to anything without calculating the impact first. So she had started practicing, trying to remember how to be human instead of just competent. But the practices felt hollow. She could make her face smile, but she couldn't remember what genuine joy felt like. She could make her expression soften, but she had no one to soften it for. Every night she stood in front of that mirror and performed emotions she no longer experienced, and every morning she woke up and put on the armor and went back into the world where weakness meant destruction. The bet with Marcus Hayes had been easy to make because Alexandra no longer really saw people, not as individuals with lives and stories and reasons for their choices. She saw assets and liabilities, obstacles and opportunities, problems and solutions. The clerk at the convenience store had been a solution to a problem, nothing more. The terms of the bet had been calculated to maximize her advantage while minimizing her risk. She hadn't considered his humanity because she had long ago stopped considering her own. Now, as she sat in the back of her Mercedes being driven to the building where Marcus would either save or humiliate himself, Alexandra felt something she couldn't quite name stirring in her chest. It wasn't regret, exactly. She didn't do regret. It was more like curiosity. Why had he accepted? What could possibly be worth the terms she had offered? Her assistant in the front seat was on the phone coordinating with building security, making sure everything would be ready for Marcus to begin work the moment they arrived. Her two other associates were in a separate car behind them, bringing the camera equipment to document whatever happened. Alexandra had her tablet open, reviewing the client file for the building, preparing for every possible outcome. If Marcus succeeded, she would pay him the $10,000 and present it as an example of her unconventional problem-solving. If he failed, she would film the kiss and post it with commentary about people who overestimated their abilities. Either way, she would maintain the image of someone in control, someone who made decisive moves and followed through on threats and promises alike. But something about the way Marcus had looked at her in the convenience store nagged at Alexandra's thoughts. There had been no fear in his eyes when she made the bet. No excitement at the money. Just a kind of weary resignation, as if he were accepting something inevitable rather than choosing something he wanted. And the way he had given that money to the small boy with the pennies, casually handing over what looked like one of his last bills without hesitation or calculation, suggested a character that didn't fit Alexandra's usual categories. She pushed the thoughts away. It didn't matter who Marcus Hayes was or why he had accepted her terms. All that mattered was solving the HVAC crisis and maintaining her reputation with the board and the client. Everything else was noise. The car pulled up to the building, a modern structure in downtown Seattle that Sterling Properties had acquired 2 years ago and spent millions renovating. The lobby was dark except for emergency lighting, and a security guard met them at the entrance with keys and access codes. Alexandra's team moved with practiced efficiency, setting up in the mechanical room where the HVAC controls were located, arranging lights and camera positions in preparation for whatever happened next. Marcus arrived 10 minutes later, driving an old Toyota that looked like it should have been retired years ago. He parked in a loading zone and retrieved 2 large equipment cases from his trunk, handling them with the kind of care that suggested they contained something valuable. When he entered the mechanical room, Alexandra noticed that he had changed from his convenience store uniform into jeans and a worn work shirt, and his expression was focused in a way that made her suddenly uncertain about the outcome she had assumed was inevitable. He set down his cases and looked around the mechanical room with an assessment that seemed both quick and comprehensive. Then he looked at Alexandra and asked a single question. "Do you want me to explain what I'm doing as I work, or do you want me to just fix it?" Alexandra opened her mouth to respond, then closed it. She realized she had expected him to be nervous, maybe a little intimidated by her and her team and the stakes of what he had agreed to. But Marcus just looked tired and determined, like someone about to do a job he had done 1,000 times before. "Just fix it," she said finally, and something in her voice sounded different even to her own ears. Less certain. Less controlled. Marcus nodded once and opened his equipment cases, and Alexandra saw tools that looked military-grade and well-maintained, each one precisely placed in custom foam cutouts. He selected a diagnostic meter and approached the HVAC control panel with movements that suggested deep familiarity, and Alexandra realized with a start that she might have severely underestimated the man she had just bet against. Her assistant leaned close and whispered that they should probably start filming, document the attempt even if it failed. But Alexandra held up one hand, delaying, suddenly unsure if she wanted a record of what was about to happen. Because if Marcus succeeded, if this convenience store clerk fixed in 4 hours what 2 licensed contractors couldn't fix in 8, then the video wouldn't show her cleverness in identifying talent. It would show her cruelty in exploiting someone's desperation with terms designed to humiliate them. For the first time in 6 years, Alexandra Sterling felt something that might have been shame. And she stood in the mechanical room with her expensive suit and her camera equipment and her practiced expressions, and she wondered what her father would say if he could see her now. Then she remembered that her father would probably approve, would probably congratulate her on structuring a bet that protected her interests regardless of outcome, and that realization somehow made everything worse. Marcus was already deep into his diagnostic process, checking connections and readings with a speed and precision that suggested expertise far beyond basic maintenance. He moved with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what they were doing, and Alexandra watched him and felt the ground shifting beneath her certainty. She had built her life on the foundation her father had laid, the lessons about strength and weakness and the necessity of dominance. But standing in that mechanical room watching Marcus work, she wondered for the first time if her father had been wrong about everything that mattered. The thought was dangerous. Destabilizing. Alexandra pushed it away and focused on her tablet, pretending to review documents while her mind raced through calculations of how to maintain control of a situation that was rapidly moving beyond her ability to direct it. She had made this bet assuming she understood all the variables, that she could predict and manage every possible outcome. But she was beginning to suspect that she had missed something crucial, something about human dignity and worth that her father's lessons had never covered. Marcus worked in focused silence, and Alexandra Sterling stood surrounded by her team and her cameras and her carefully constructed armor, and she felt more alone than she had ever felt in her life. Lily Hayes was 8 years old, and she understood more about the world than most adults realized. She understood, for instance, that her father was sad in a way that never fully went away, even when he smiled at her drawings or laughed at her jokes. She understood that they didn't have much money, even though her father never complained about it and always made sure she had what she needed. And she understood, in the way children understand things they've never been explicitly told, that her mother's death had changed everything about their lives in ways that could never be changed back. But Lily also understood something else, something that burned bright and constant in her chest like a small sun. She loved building things. Loved taking them apart and putting them back together and figuring out how they worked. Loved the feeling when a connection clicked into place or a circuit completed or a design that existed only in her head suddenly became real in her hands. She had her father's aptitude for mechanical systems, though she didn't know that's what it was called. She just knew that when she looked at something broken, she could usually see what was wrong and how to fix it. When she saw something that could be improved, she could imagine the modifications needed and sketch them out with surprising accuracy. Her teacher had noticed it during a science unit on simple machines, had pulled Marcus aside after class and suggested that Lily had genuine talent that should be encouraged. Marcus had smiled and thanked the teacher and promised to do what he could. But Lily had seen the tightness around his eyes, had recognized the expression that meant they couldn't afford whatever was being suggested. She had learned not to ask for things that cost money, had learned to make do with what they had learned that sometimes love meant not mentioning the things you wanted because you didn't want to make the person who loved you feel bad about not being able to provide them. Tonight was the school art competition, and Lily had been working on her submission for 3 weeks. She had chosen to do a technical drawing because that was what she loved, what made sense to her in a way that painting or sculpture never had. Her drawing showed a robot designed to help people who had trouble moving, with articulated arms that could reach high shelves and strong supports that could help someone stand up from a chair. She had labeled every component, had calculated approximate measurements, had even included notes about what materials might work best for each part. She had done all of it with notebook paper from the dollar store and broken crayons that her grandmother had saved from the restaurant where she worked part-time. The lighting at her grandmother's kitchen table was terrible, a single overhead bulb that cast shadows and made it hard to see details. But Lily had worked carefully, erasing and redrawing until each line was exactly where it needed to be, until the proportions were right and the labels were clear and the whole drawing looked like something that could actually be built. Her grandmother had watched her work with an expression Lily didn't fully understand. Pride mixed with sadness, maybe. Or love mixed with worry. When Lily had finished the drawing 2 days ago and asked what her grandmother thought, the older woman had hugged her tight and said it was beautiful, absolutely beautiful, and that her mother would have been so proud. Lily didn't remember her mother very clearly. She had been 5 when the accident happened, and most of her memories were more like impressions than actual images. The smell of her mother's perfume. The sound of her laugh. The feeling of being held and knowing you were completely safe. But she had one clear memory that she returned to often, especially when she was working on her projects. She remembered sitting at the kitchen table in their old house, the one they lived in before they moved to Seattle, and her mother was helping her build something. Lily couldn't remember what it was anymore, just that it involved cardboard and tape and markers. Her mother had been patient, showing Lily how to measure and cut and connect pieces together, and at one point Lily had gotten frustrated because it wasn't working the way she wanted. Her mother had knelt down beside her chair and said something that Lily had never forgotten. Building things is hard, sweetheart. But the hard things are the ones worth doing. Don't give up just because it's difficult. Give up only if you stop loving it. Lily had never stopped loving it. Even after her mother died. Even when they moved to Seattle and her father started working nights and they lived in a small apartment where Lily's bedroom was just barely big enough for her bed and a small desk. She kept building and drawing and imagining, because it was the thing that made her feel closest to the mother she barely remembered. The robotics program at the Seattle Science Center was something Lily had learned about from a flyer at school. It met every Saturday, and students got to work with real robotics kits and learn programming and build actual working robots. The flyer had pictures of kids her age assembling complex machines, their faces bright with concentration and joy, and Lily had stared at those pictures for so long that she had the images memorized. She had brought the flyer home to her father, trying to keep the hope out of her voice because she knew they probably couldn't afford it. The program cost $100 a month, and students needed to have their own basic toolkit that cost another $80. Her father had read the flyer carefully, and Lily had watched his face go through several expressions before settling on something neutral and gentle. Maybe, he had said, which was his word for probably not, but I don't want to disappoint you. If we can make it work, we'll try. Lily had accepted this because she had no choice, and because she knew her father was doing his best. She had put the flyer in her desk drawer and continued drawing her robots and teaching herself about circuits and programming from library books. If she couldn't attend the program, she could at least prepare for the day when maybe became yes. The school art competition had seemed like an opportunity. The winners in each age category received a $200 scholarship toward summer programs. $200 wouldn't cover the whole robotics program, but it would cover 2 months, which would be better than nothing. So Lily had poured everything she knew into her technical drawing, had made it as professional and detailed as she possibly could with the materials available to her. Tonight her father was at work, and Lily was at her grandmother's house putting the finishing touches on her submission. She had the dress on, the blue one with pockets that her mother had bought her 2 years ago. It was getting too short, hitting above her knees now instead of at them, but Lily loved it because she remembered the day they bought it. Her mother had held up several dresses, and Lily had chosen this one because it had pockets. Her mother had laughed and said that was the most practical reason for choosing a dress she had ever heard. Lily carefully rolled up her drawing and secured it with a rubber band, then placed it in the cardboard tube her grandmother had saved from a mailing. The competition started at 7, and her grandmother would drive her there and stay to watch. Her father would try to come if he could get away from work, but Lily knew that probably meant he couldn't. His shifts were strict about coverage, and leaving early meant someone else had to cover, and her father didn't like asking for favors. But that was okay. Lily understood. She understood so much more than her father realized. She understood that he had given up something important when her mother died, though she didn't know exactly what. She understood that he worked a job he probably didn't like because it meant he could be home in the mornings and evenings with her. She understood that he was tired all the time but never complained, never made her feel like she was a burden. And she understood that if she won this competition, if she got that scholarship, it would make him happy. Not because of the money, exactly, but because it would prove that she was okay, that she was thriving despite everything, that his sacrifices were worth it. Lily wanted to win for herself, wanted that scholarship and the chance to attend the robotics program. But more than that, she wanted to win for her father. She wanted to give him something to be proud of, something that would make the tightness around his eyes ease just a little. Her grandmother called from the living room that it was time to go. Lily picked up her cardboard tube with careful hands, checked to make sure her drawing was secure, and walked to the door. She paused at the small table in the hallway where her grandmother kept family photos, and she looked at the one picture displayed of her mother. It had been taken at a park, and her mother was laughing at something off camera, her face bright with joy. "I'm going to make you proud," Lily whispered to the photo. "Both of you." Then she followed her grandmother out to the car, her drawing clutched against her chest, her heart full of hope and determination and the kind of love that 8-year-old children feel for parents who sacrifice everything without ever making them feel guilty about it. The science center where the competition was being held was only a 20-minute drive, but to Lily it felt longer. She kept thinking about the other kids who would be competing, wondering if their drawings would be better, if they had better materials or more practice or more natural talent. She thought about the judges, wondering what they would look for, if a technical drawing would seem boring compared to paintings or sculptures. But mostly she thought about the robot she had drawn. It was a good design. She knew it was. The articulated arms would actually work if someone built them. The support system would actually help someone stand. It wasn't just imagination, it was engineering. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. They arrived at the center, and Lily saw dozens of other kids with their submissions, and her stomach clenched with nervousness. But she squared her shoulders the way she had seen her father do when he was facing something difficult, and she walked through those doors with her drawing held high, ready to show the world what small hands with big dreams could create. Marcus Hayes stood in the mechanical room of Sterling Properties downtown building at 7:43 p.m., and for the first time in 3 years, he felt like himself. The tools in his hands were familiar weight and balance, extensions of muscle memory that years away hadn't erased. The control panel in front of him displayed readings that told a story he knew how to read. The smell of machine oil and electrical components was the scent of competence, of purpose, of everything he had been before grief had reduced him to someone who wiped counters and restocked shelves. He had 45 minutes gone and 3 hours 15 minutes remaining. The clock on the wall ticked with mechanical precision, each second another small increment toward success or humiliation. But Marcus wasn't thinking about the bet anymore, wasn't thinking about Alexandra Sterling or her cameras or the terms he had accepted. He was thinking about the HVAC system, about the elegant complexity of environmental controls and the way problems revealed themselves if you knew how to look. The first contractor had diagnosed a compressor failure. The second had thought it was a refrigerant leak. Both had been wrong, but Marcus could see why they had arrived at those conclusions. The symptoms fit. The system refused to activate, pressure readings were abnormal, and the backup refused to engage. If you approached it as a simple mechanical failure, those diagnoses made sense. But Marcus had spent 12 years working on environmental systems where simple mechanical failures could kill people, where every system had redundancies and fail-safes and backups to the backups. He knew that complex systems rarely failed for simple reasons. Usually they failed because multiple small problems combined in unexpected ways, creating cascade effects that looked catastrophic but could be resolved if you traced them back to their origins. He started with the diagnostic meter, checking voltage at key connection points. The readings were within normal parameters, which ruled out electrical supply issues. He moved to the control board itself, examining the logic circuits that govern system activation. Everything appeared functional. The third check was refrigerant pressure, which showed low but not critically so. Not enough to prevent operation, just enough to reduce efficiency. Marcus worked methodically, his hands moving with the precision that came from doing the same tasks thousands of times. He was aware of Alexandra and her team watching from the corner of the room, but he didn't look at them. Didn't acknowledge their presence. He was in the zone that skilled technicians entered when confronting a challenging problem, where the work became everything and the world narrowed to tools and readings and the logical progression of troubleshooting. At 8:17, he found the first real clue. The backup system's engagement mechanism showed signs of corrosion on the connection terminals. Not enough to prevent function entirely, but enough to create resistance that might prevent activation under certain conditions. Marcus cleaned the terminals with contact solution from his kit, working carefully to remove the oxidation without damaging the underlying metal. At 8:40, he discovered the second problem. The thermal sensor that should have triggered backup activation when primary systems failed had been calibrated incorrectly. Possibly during installation, possibly during a previous maintenance cycle. The sensor was reading temperature correctly, but the threshold for activation had been set 5 degrees too high. Combined with the terminal corrosion, it meant the backup system would never engage when needed. Marcus recalibrated the sensor, checking his work twice to ensure accuracy. The settings were stored in the control board's memory, so he had to access the programming interface and modify the values directly. It was delicate work, requiring knowledge of the specific control system's architecture. But this was a Microtech 5000 series controller, and Marcus had worked on dozens of them during his Air Force career. The interface was familiar territory. At 9:15, with 1 hour 45 minutes remaining, Marcus began reassembling the components he had tested and verified. Every connection was checked. Every terminal was cleaned. Every sensor was confirmed operational. The corrosion issue was resolved. The calibration error was corrected. But there was still something wrong. He could feel it in the way the system responded when he ran preliminary tests. Everything should be working, but it wasn't, and that meant there was a third problem he hadn't identified yet. He stepped back from the control panel and closed his eyes, visualizing the system as a whole. In the Air Force, they had trained him to think in systems rather than components, to see how individual elements combined into functional wholes. An HVAC system wasn't just a collection of parts. It was a carefully balanced machine where every element depended on every other element functioning correctly. The compressor, the condenser, the evaporator, the expansion valve, the refrigerant lines, the control systems, the safety interlocks, the backup engagement mechanisms. Marcus mentally traced the flow of refrigerant through the system, following it from component to component, looking for the point where the cascade failure originated. Then he saw it. Not with his eyes, but with his understanding. The expansion valve had been cycling incorrectly, creating pressure differentials that looked like compressor failure to the first contractor and refrigerant loss to the second. But the valve itself wasn't broken. It was responding to incorrect signals from the control board, which was receiving incorrect data from the miscalibrated thermal sensor, which should have triggered the backup system except the corroded terminals prevented engagement. It was elegant in its complexity. 3 small problems, none of them catastrophic individually, combining to create total system failure. Fix any two of them and the system would still fail. Fix all three and everything would work perfectly. Marcus opened his eyes and returned to the control panel. At 9:43, with 2 hours 17 minutes remaining, he located the expansion valve control circuit and began testing its responses. As he suspected, the valve was operating correctly but receiving incorrect control signals. He traced the circuit back to its source, identified the specific relay that was misinterpreting sensor data, and found a hairline crack in the relay housing that was allowing moisture infiltration. The relay would need to be replaced. Marcus checked his toolkit and found a compatible unit, military surplus that he had kept for years because you never knew when you might need it. He removed the damaged relay, installed the replacement, and sealed the housing with waterproof compound. Then he rechecked every connection in the control circuit, ensuring no other points of moisture infiltration existed. At 10:21, with 1 hour 39 minutes remaining, Marcus initiated a full system test. The control board processed his command, sent activation signals to the appropriate components, and the primary HVAC system came to life with a low hum that built into a steady throb of mechanical operation. Pressure readings normalized. Temperature sensors showed the system responding correctly. Airflow began moving through the ducts with the whisper of forced air through metal passages. Marcus watched the readings for 5 full minutes, verifying that everything was operating within parameters. Then he shut down the primary system and manually triggered a failure condition to test the backup. The control board recognized the failure. The thermal sensor transmitted the correct temperature data. The backup engagement mechanism received the activation signal through the now clean terminals. And the backup system activated perfectly, taking over operations within 30 seconds of primary system shutdown. Marcus ran the test 3 more times, simulating different failure scenarios, verifying that the backup would engage reliably under any condition that might occur. Every test confirmed successful operation. The system was fixed. Completely, comprehensively fixed in a way that addressed not just the symptoms but the underlying causes. At 10:52, with 3 hours and 9 minutes elapsed and 51 minutes remaining before midnight, Marcus began packing his tools. He cleaned each one carefully before returning it to its designated position in the foam cutouts. He disposed of the damaged relay and the materials he had used. He wiped down the control panel, leaving it cleaner than he had found it. The work was complete. Only then did he turn to face Alexandra Sterling and her team. They had been silent throughout his work, watching with expressions that had evolved from skepticism to interest to something that might have been wonder. Alexandra herself was staring at him with an intensity that made Marcus uncomfortable, like she was seeing him for the first time and trying to reconcile what she was seeing with her previous assumptions. "It's fixed," Marcus said quietly. "All 3 problems identified and resolved. Your primary system is operational and your backup will engage properly if needed. The system should run without issues for at least 2 years, assuming regular maintenance." Alexandra didn't respond immediately. She looked at the control panel, then at Marcus, then at her associates as if seeking confirmation of what had just happened. Finally she walked to the panel and examined the readings displayed on the digital interface. Everything showed green. Optimal operation. No warnings. No errors. "How did you know?" she asked, and her voice had changed from the cold certainty Marcus remembered from the convenience store. Now she sounded uncertain, almost vulnerable. 2 licensed contractors couldn't find the problem. "How did you know?" Marcus picked up his equipment cases, ready to leave. "Because I didn't just look at the symptoms," he said. "I looked at the whole system. I looked at how the problems connected to each other. That's what I was trained to do." He started toward the door, carrying his cases, ready to walk away from this building and this bet and this woman who had offered him money in exchange for his dignity. But Alexandra's voice stopped him before he reached the exit. "Wait," she said. "The $10,000. I need to get it for you." Marcus turned back slowly. He looked at Alexandra Sterling in her expensive suit, surrounded by her team and her success and her obvious power. He thought about the $10,000 and what it would mean. The robotics program for Lily. The dental work. The breathing room. All of it within reach if he just accepted what he had earned. But he also thought about the terms of the bet. About the kiss that was supposed to be his reward if he failed, the humiliation that was supposed to be his punishment for daring to claim knowledge he shouldn't possess. He thought about how those terms had been structured to demean him regardless of outcome, to reinforce the message that people like him existed to serve people like her. And Marcus realized that he didn't want her money. Not like this. Not as payment for a bet designed to break him. What he wanted was something that actually mattered. "I don't need your money," Marcus said, and he watched Alexandra's face register shock. I don't need a promotion or a bonus or whatever else you think I want. I need one thing. One specific thing, and if you can give me that, we'll call it even. Alexandra recovered her composure, but something in her eyes remained uncertain. What do you need? My daughter, Marcus said, and his voice was steady despite the emotion behind it. She's 8 years old. She's at the Seattle Science Center right now for an art competition. She submitted a technical drawing because that's what she loves, building things and designing things and figuring out how things work. She wants to attend the robotics program there, but it costs $100 a month and requires an $80 toolkit. I can't afford it. But you can. He paused, making sure Alexandra understood exactly what he was asking. Turn the lights on for her. Pay for 3 months of the program and buy her the toolkit she needs. That's all I want. Nothing for myself. Just a chance for my daughter to learn and build and become everything she's capable of becoming. The room was completely silent. Alexandra's associate stared at Marcus like he had done something incomprehensible, refusing $10,000 cash for a $380 investment in a child's education. But Marcus didn't care what they thought. He cared only about the answer. Alexandra looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded once, sharp and decisive. I'll do it, she said. I'll pay for 6 months, not 3. And I'll make sure she has everything she needs. Marcus felt something release in his chest, a tension he hadn't fully realized he was carrying. Thank you, he said simply. Then he walked toward the door again, his toolkit cases in hand, ready to leave this building and this night behind. But as he reached the exit, Alexandra's voice stopped him one final time. Why did you take the bet? She asked, and now her voice was small, almost hurt. Why did you agree to those terms? Marcus looked back at her over his shoulder. Because I watched a kid count pennies for a sandwich tonight, he said. And I realized my daughter was doing the same thing with broken crayons and notebook paper. I took your bet because she needed me to. Because being humiliated in front of strangers mattered less than giving my daughter a chance. He left then, walking out into the rain without waiting for Alexandra's response. He drove home in his old Toyota with his toolkit cases in the trunk and the knowledge that he had just traded potential financial security for his daughter's education. But he didn't regret it. Not for a second. By the time he reached his apartment, it was 11:30. Lily would still be at the competition. Marcus changed quickly, pulling on clean clothes, and drove to the Seattle Science Center with hope building in his chest that he might make it before the winners were announced. He arrived at 11:52 to find the lobby crowded with parents and children, everyone gathered around a small stage where a woman with a microphone was announcing the final category results. Marcus pushed through the crowd, searching for Lily's face, and he found her standing near the back with his mother, her cardboard tube clutched in both hands, her expression a mixture of hope and resignation. Then he heard her name. Lily Hayes, first place, ages 7 to 9, technical drawing category. And he watched his daughter's face transform from resignation to shock to pure, incandescent joy. She ran to the stage, her too short blue dress flying, and accepted her ribbon and certificate with shaking hands. But she didn't look at the judges or the audience. She looked at the back of the room, searching, and when her eyes found Marcus standing there, she held up her ribbon and mouthed the words, "Did you see?" Marcus nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in his throat. He had seen. He had seen everything that mattered. There are more stories like this one waiting for you. Check the description box below for links to similar journeys of hidden worth and unexpected love. Alexandra Sterling stood alone in the mechanical room after Marcus Hayes left, surrounded by her team and the humming HVAC system that shouldn't be working but was. Her associates were gathering the camera equipment, discussing the unexpected outcome, debating whether there was any way to spin this into content that supported the company's image. But Alexandra wasn't listening. She was staring at the control panel with its green indicators and optimal readings, trying to understand what had just happened. She had offered $10,000. Cash. Tonight. More money than most people made in 3 months, offered for 4 hours of work. And Marcus Hayes had refused it. Had asked instead for less than $400 worth of programming fees and equipment for a daughter Alexandra hadn't known existed until 2 minutes ago. The mathematics didn't make sense. The decision didn't make sense. Everything Alexandra understood about human behavior and motivation said that people took the money when it was offered, that they maximized their personal gain, that they acted in their own self-interest. But Marcus had done the opposite, and Alexandra couldn't fit that action into any framework she possessed for understanding how the world worked. One of her associates approached, asking if they should delete the footage they had captured. There wasn't much, just Marcus working in focused silence, but it existed and needed to be dealt with one way or another. Alexandra told them to delete everything, then changed her mind and told them to save it to a secure drive. She didn't know why. The footage wouldn't be useful for any business purpose. But something in her insisted it needed to be preserved. The building was saved. The client inspection could proceed at midnight as scheduled, and the HVAC system would perform perfectly. Alexandra had solved her crisis. She should have felt relieved, victorious, validated in her decision to pursue an unconventional solution. Instead she felt hollow, like she had won a battle but lost something more important in the process. She dismissed her team, telling them to go home and get rest before the busy week ahead. They departed with the efficiency of people who knew better than to question her commands, leaving Alexandra alone in the mechanical room with only the steady hum of the repaired HVAC system for company. She stood there for a long time, long enough that the building security guard called her phone to confirm she was okay. At 11:45, Alexandra left the building and drove toward her penthouse apartment. But halfway there, she made an impulsive decision and redirected toward the Seattle Science Center instead. She told herself it was to confirm that Marcus's daughter actually existed, that the story wasn't some elaborate con designed to manipulate her emotions. But that rationale felt hollow even as she constructed it. She was going because she needed to see what was worth more than $10,000. She arrived just before midnight and parked in a loading zone, using her position and name to bypass the parking attendants' protests. The lobby was still crowded with families departing, children clutching ribbons and certificates, parents taking photos and offering congratulations. Alexandra felt suddenly, intensely out of place in her business suit and heels, surrounded by casual family joy she had no part in. Then she saw them. Marcus and a small girl, perhaps 8 years old, with dark hair and eyes that looked too knowing for her age. The child was wearing a blue dress that was slightly too short, holding a first-place ribbon like it was made of gold, talking rapidly while Marcus listened with an expression Alexandra had never seen on his face in the convenience store. Pride mixed with love mixed with exhaustion mixed with something that might have been grief. An older woman stood with them, presumably Marcus's mother based on the resemblance. The three of them formed a tight unit, connected by invisible threads of shared history and mutual support. Alexandra watched from the lobby entrance as they gathered the daughter's belongings, as they discussed getting ice cream to celebrate despite the late hour, as they moved together with the practiced coordination of people who had learned to function as a team. Alexandra should have left then. Should have confirmed that the daughter was real and driven to her apartment and processed this entire strange night in private. But instead she found herself walking toward them, drawn by something she couldn't name and didn't want to examine too closely. Marcus saw her first. His expression shifted from joy to wariness, his body language becoming protective as he positioned himself slightly in front of his daughter. The older woman noticed the change and followed Marcus's gaze, her eyes narrowing with suspicion when she saw Alexandra's expensive clothes and calculated appearance. "Miss Sterling," Marcus said, his voice carefully neutral. "This is unexpected." Alexandra opened her mouth to offer some explanation, some businesslike reason for her presence. But what came out instead was the truth. "I wanted to see," she said simply. "I wanted to understand what was worth more than $10,000. The daughter looked up at Marcus with confusion, clearly not understanding the reference. Marcus's expression tightened, and Alexandra saw him making the decision not to explain, not to tell his daughter about the bet or the terms or any of it. He was protecting her from knowledge that would hurt, and Alexandra felt something crack in her chest at the evidence of that protection. "This is my daughter Lily," Marcus said finally, his hand resting on the child's shoulder. "Lily, this is Miss Sterling. She's the one who's going to help with your robotics program." Lily's eyes went wide. "Really? You're going to help me go to robotics?" Alexandra knelt down without thinking about it, bringing herself to Lily's eye level. "Yes," she said, and her voice was softer than she had known it could be. "Your father fixed something very important for me tonight. In exchange, I'm going to make sure you have everything you need for the robotics program." Lily looked at her father, then back at Alexandra, then held out her first-place ribbon with both hands like she was offering a treasure. "I won," she said, her voice full of pride and wonder. "I drew a robot that helps people, and the judges said it was really good. Do you want to see it?" Before Alexandra could respond, Lily was unrolling her technical drawing from its cardboard tube, smoothing it out on a nearby bench with careful hands. Alexandra moved closer and looked at the drawing, and something in her chest tightened painfully. The design was remarkable, not just for a child but by any standard. The proportions were accurate. The mechanical joints were positioned correctly. The labels were precise and detailed. This wasn't just imagination or childish fantasy. This was legitimate engineering thinking rendered in broken crayons on notebook paper. This is brilliant, Alexandra said, and she meant it. The articulated arms here, these would actually work if someone built them. And this support system, you've thought about weight distribution and balance. Where did you learn to do this? Lily beamed. My dad taught me some of it. And I read library books about robots and engineering. But mostly I just figure it out by looking at things and thinking about how they work. Alexandra studied the drawing more closely, noticing details she had missed on first glance. The careful erasure marks where Lily had corrected mistakes. The slightly smudged areas where small hands had rested while working. The way certain lines were darker than others because broken crayons didn't color evenly. This drawing represented hours of concentrated effort under inadequate lighting with minimal materials, and it was still better than work Alexandra had seen from adults with proper training and equipment. You have a gift, Alexandra said quietly, looking up at Lily. A real gift. And your father is right to want you in that robotics program. Marcus's mother spoke for the first time, her voice carrying a protective edge. We appreciate your help with the program. But Lily's always had everything she needs because her father makes sure of it. Don't mistake having less money for having less love. Alexandra stood up slowly, feeling the rebuke even though the words had been spoken gently. I didn't mean to suggest otherwise, she said. I can see how much love there is here. That's why I came. The admission hung in the air, more vulnerable than Alexandra had intended. She saw Marcus and his mother exchange glances, some wordless communication passing between them. Then Marcus's expression softened slightly, the wariness easing into something that might have been understanding. The robotics program meets on Saturdays, Marcus said. I'll need your contact information to coordinate payment and equipment purchase. Alexandra pulled out her phone, opening a new contact entry. But instead of just providing her office number, she found herself adding her personal cell phone, the one only her assistant and 2 other people had. She sent Marcus a text so he would have her information, and when her phone buzzed with his confirmation message, she noticed his contact was saved simply as Marcus, convenience store. She changed it to Marcus Hayes while they watched, a small acknowledgement that she now saw him as more than just a minimum wage worker who had surprised her. Then she looked at Lily again, this child with her too short dress and her first place ribbon and her remarkable drawing, and Alexandra made a decision that felt both impulsive and inevitable. The robotics program is good, Alexandra said. But it's just the beginning. If you keep developing this talent, if you keep working this hard, there are specialized summer programs. Engineering camps at universities. Competitions with scholarships attached. Your father has my contact information now. If you need help accessing any of those opportunities, if there are barriers that money can remove, tell him to call me. Why? Marcus's mother asked bluntly. Why would you do that? Alexandra looked at the older woman, then at Marcus, then at Lily. Because I watched your son give up $10,000 for his daughter's education tonight, she said. Because he fixed an impossible problem and asked for nothing for himself. Because I've spent 6 years believing that strength meant never showing weakness, and tonight someone showed me what actual strength looks like. She paused, feeling exposed in a way she hadn't felt since her father's death. I don't have children. I don't have family. I don't have anything except a company and a reputation and an empty apartment. But I do have money, and if I can use it to help a child like Lily, then maybe that's worth something. Marcus studied her face for a long moment. Then he extended his hand. Thank you, he said simply. For keeping your word. For this. Alexandra shook his hand, and she felt the calluses on his palm, the evidence of years of physical work. These were hands that had fixed aircraft and raised a daughter and wiped down convenience store counters without complaint. These were hands that had chosen dignity over money and love over pride. She held the handshake a moment longer than necessary, some part of her wanting to absorb whatever quality allowed someone to make choices like the ones Marcus had made tonight. I should go, Alexandra said, releasing his hand. You have celebrating to do, and I'm intruding. But as she turned to leave, Lily's voice stopped her. Miss Sterling? Do you like robots? Alexandra looked back at the child. I don't know, she said honestly. I've never really thought about it. Lily considered this with the seriousness of someone much older. You should come to the robotics program sometime. We could show you what we're building. It's really cool when you see robots actually moving and doing things. The invitation was innocent, offered with the open generosity of a child who didn't yet understand social boundaries or appropriate relationships between wealthy CEOs and the children of their employees. Marcus started to intervene, probably to explain why Miss Sterling would be too busy for such things. But Alexandra spoke before he could. I'd like that, she said, surprising herself. When you have something working, When you've built something you're proud of, have your father let me know. I'll come see it. Lily's face lit up with delight, and Alexandra felt something shift in her chest at being the cause of that expression. Then the family was gathering their belongings again, preparing to leave for the promised celebratory ice cream. Alexandra watched them go, Marcus's hand on his daughter's shoulder, his mother walking beside them, all three of them moving together through the thinning crowd and out into the night. Alexandra stood alone in the lobby of the Seattle Science Center at 12:17 in the morning, surrounded by the debris of a completed competition and the echoes of family joy. She pulled out her phone and looked at Marcus's contact information, this connection to a man who had walked into her life for 4 hours and somehow dismantled assumptions she had built over decades. Then she drove to her penthouse apartment and stood in front of the bathroom mirror, preparing to practice her expressions as she did every night. But when she tried to smile with controlled warmth, the expression that appeared was something different. Something genuine and uncertain and a little bit broken. She stared at that reflection for a long time, this woman who had everything measurable and nothing that mattered, and she wondered when she had last felt anything as pure as Lily's joy over a first-place ribbon. Alexandra didn't practice her expressions that night. Instead she sat on her white leather couch in her perfectly decorated apartment and thought about broken crayons and notebook paper and the way Marcus had looked at his daughter. She thought about her father's lessons about strength and weakness, and she wondered if every single one of them had been wrong. At 2 in the morning, unable to sleep, Alexandra opened her laptop and began researching engineering programs for gifted children. She bookmarked summer camps at MIT and Stanford. She saved information about robotics competitions with scholarship prizes. She created a folder on her desktop labeled simply Lily, and filled it with opportunities that money could provide and talent could earn. She told herself it was just prudent planning, making sure she could follow through on her offer to help. But she knew it was more than that. It was the first time in 6 years that she had thought about someone else's future with more interest than she thought about her own company's quarterly reports. Alexandra Sterling fell asleep on her couch at 3:30 in the morning, still dressed in her business suit, her laptop open to a page describing a robotic summer program for middle school students. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she dreamed about something other than board meetings and property acquisitions. She dreamed about a small girl in a blue dress, building robots that helped people, changing the world with designs drawn in broken crayons. If you're invested in seeing how this ends, subscribe so you never miss a story. These tales of falling and rising again come out regularly. 3 days passed before Alexandra Sterling allowed herself to look at Marcus Hayes' employee file. 3 days of telling herself it didn't matter who he was or where he had come from, that their transaction was complete and there was no reason to pursue further information. 3 days of lying to herself about why she kept checking her phone, wondering if he would call about the robotics program payment, hoping for some excuse to hear his voice again. On Wednesday afternoon, sitting in her office overlooking downtown Seattle, Alexandra finally gave in to the curiosity that had been gnawing at her since Saturday night. She opened the company's employee database and searched for Marcus Hayes. What appeared on her screen was remarkably sparse. Hired 3 years ago for the convenience store franchise Sterling Properties owned, reliable attendance, no disciplinary issues, no promotions or raises beyond standard cost of living adjustments. Emergency contact listed as Rachel Hayes, presumably his mother. Nothing else. No employment history before the convenience store. No education credentials. No indication that this man had any skills beyond operating a cash register and mopping floors. But Alexandra had watched him fix an HVAC system that had baffled 2 licensed contractors. She had seen the military-grade tools in his equipment cases. She had recognized the systematic thinking and specialized knowledge that didn't come from casual learning or random chance. The employee file was incomplete, deliberately or accidentally, and Alexandra needed to know why. She picked up her phone and called Marcus directly, using the personal number he had sent her. He answered on the 3rd ring, his voice wary. "Ms. Sterling. Is something wrong with the robotics program payment?" "No," Alexandra said, then paused, uncertain how to ask what she wanted to know. "The payment was processed yesterday. Lily should have access to the program starting this Saturday. I'm calling about something else." Silence on the other end. Alexandra could hear ambient noise in the background, the beep of a scanner, the rustle of customers. Marcus was at work, standing behind that convenience store counter, and she was interrupting his shift to satisfy her curiosity about his past. "Your employee file is incomplete," Alexandra said, choosing directness over subtlety. "It doesn't list any employment history before the convenience store. No education credentials. Nothing about where you learned the skills you demonstrated Saturday night. I'm calling to ask if you'd be willing to provide that information." Why? Marcus's voice was carefully neutral, giving nothing away. Because I want to understand, Alexandra said honestly. I want to know how someone with your capabilities ends up working at a convenience store. I want to know what your story is. Another pause, longer this time. Then Marcus spoke quietly. It's not relevant to anything, Miss Sterling. I fixed your HVAC system. You're helping Lily with the robotics program. Our transaction is complete. Alexandra should have accepted that answer. Should have respected his obvious desire for privacy and ended the call. But something in his voice, some combination of weariness and resignation, made her push further. I know it's not my business, she said. But I'm asking anyway. Not as your employer. As someone who spent 3 days thinking about what you did Saturday night. She heard Marcus exhale slowly. Then he spoke words that changed everything. Staff Sergeant Marcus Hayes, United States Air Force, Environmental Control System Specialist, 12 years of service, honorable discharge 3 years ago. That's what's missing from your employee file. That's who I was before I became someone who wipes down counters for minimum wage. The information hit Alexandra like a physical blow. Military. 12 years. Staff Sergeant. Suddenly the tools and the skills and the systematic approach made perfect sense. But it raised more questions than it answered. Why did you leave? She asked. Marcus didn't answer immediately. In the background, Alexandra heard him excuse himself to someone, heard the sound of a door opening and closing. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, more private. My wife died, he said simply. Car accident. Drunk driver. She died, and I had a 5-year-old daughter, and I couldn't keep deploying overseas while Lily needed a parent who was actually present. So I took early separation and moved here and took the first job that let me be home when she needed me. The stark simplicity of the explanation somehow made it more devastating. Alexandra sat in her expensive office chair, surrounded by mahogany furniture and original artwork, and tried to imagine making a choice like that. Walking away from a career you'd spent 12 years building. Accepting poverty and menial work. Giving up everything that defined you professionally. All for a child. I'm sorry, Alexandra said, and the words felt inadequate. About your wife. About what that cost you. It didn't cost me anything, Marcus said, and there was steel in his voice now. It gave me everything that matters. Lily needed a parent who would be there every morning and every night. She needed stability and presence and someone who loved her more than they loved their career. I gave her that. I'd make the same choice 1,000 times over. Alexandra wanted to ask more. Wanted to know about the wife who had died, about the military career he had abandoned, about how it felt to possess skills you couldn't use and knowledge you couldn't apply. But she heard in Marcus's voice that he was done sharing, that he had given her what she asked for and now wanted to return to his work and his life and his privacy. Thank you for telling me, Alexandra said. I won't take up more of your shift. She ended the call and sat in silence, staring at the incomplete employee file on her screen. Then she did something she knew she probably shouldn't do. She called a contact she had at a private investigation firm, someone Sterling Properties used occasionally for background checks on potential major tenants. She provided Marcus's full name and military service information, and she asked for a complete employment history and service record. The investigator promised results within 24 hours. Alexandra thanked him and ended the call, then immediately felt guilty about the intrusion. Marcus had given her what she asked for. He had explained the gap in his employment history. There was no business reason to dig deeper. But Alexandra couldn't stop herself. She needed to understand the full scope of what he had walked away from. The report arrived via encrypted email Thursday afternoon. Alexandra opened it in her office with her door closed, feeling like she was about to read something private and sacred that she had no right to access. But once she started reading, she couldn't stop. Staff Sergeant Marcus Hayes. Born January 15, 1987. Enlisted in the Air Force at age 32 after working various construction jobs throughout his 20s. Scored exceptionally high on mechanical aptitude tests. Assigned to Environmental Control Systems training at Shepherd Air Force Base. Graduated top of his class. Stationed at Joint Base Lewis McChord, Washington, with deployments to Kuwait, Germany, South Korea, and multiple domestic installations. The report detailed his service record with clinical precision. Commendations for excellence in system maintenance. Recognition for troubleshooting complex failures under extreme time pressure. Deployment to a radar station in Alaska where he had worked in conditions that reached 60 degrees below zero, maintaining life support systems that kept personnel alive in an environment that would have killed them within minutes if something failed. Another deployment to Kuwait where he had diagnosed and repaired a critical environmental control system on a transport aircraft during a sandstorm, working in near-zero visibility to restore operation before crew members suffered heat-related casualties. There were medals. Letters of recommendation from commanding officers. Performance evaluations that used words like exceptional, irreplaceable, and once-in-a-career specialist. Marcus Hayes hadn't just been good at his job. He had been exceptional, the kind of specialist that units fought to keep, and commanders wrote evaluation reports about using superlatives. Then came the personal section. Married to Sarah Hayes, née Morrison, on March 14, 2020. Daughter Lily born February 3, 2021. Sarah Hayes died May 28, 2022, in a vehicle accident caused by an intoxicated driver. Marcus Hayes requested early separation on grounds of family hardship 6 weeks later. Request approved with honor and full benefits July 15, 2022. Final service, 12 years, 3 months. Alexandra read those dates 3 times, doing the math. Sarah had died when Lily was 15 months old. Marcus had stayed in the Air Force for only 6 weeks before requesting separation. He hadn't tried to make it work, hadn't attempted to balance his career with single parenthood. He had looked at his situation and immediately chosen his daughter over everything else. The report included a copy of Marcus's final performance evaluation, written by his commanding officer. The language was formal military prose, but the sentiment came through clearly. Staff Sergeant Hayes is an exceptional environmental systems technician whose loss will be deeply felt by this unit. His decision to separate for family hardship reasons is both understandable and commendable. He has always put service above self, and his choice to prioritize his daughter's needs over his career exemplifies the values this service seeks to instill in all its members. Any organization would be fortunate to employ someone of his caliber. Alexandra closed the document and sat staring at her computer screen for a long time. She thought about her father's lessons, about strength and weakness and the necessity of putting business before personal concerns. She thought about how Richard Sterling had taught her that sacrifice was something you extracted from others, not something you performed yourself. And she thought about Marcus Hayes, who had walked away from everything without apparent hesitation because his daughter needed him more than the Air Force did. The knowledge sat uncomfortably in Alexandra's chest. She had humiliated this man. Had structured a bet designed to demean him regardless of outcome. Had offered him money in terms that suggested she thought he could be bought and manipulated. And all along, he had been someone who had given up more for love than Alexandra had ever given up for anything. She found herself crying for the first time in years. Not the practiced tears she used occasionally in strategic situations, but genuine crying that came from somewhere deep and broken inside her. She cried for Marcus and what he had lost. She cried for Lily growing up without a mother. She cried for herself and what she had become in her desperate attempt to prove she deserved her father's company. When the tears finally stopped, Alexandra looked at herself in the small mirror she kept in her desk drawer. Her mascara had run. Her face was blotchy. She looked human in a way she hadn't looked in years, all her practiced control stripped away by genuine emotion. She cleaned her face carefully, reapplying makeup until no evidence of tears remained. Then she sat at her desk and thought about what she wanted to do with the information she had acquired. She could file it away, use it to feel better about helping Lily with the robotics program, and move on with her life. Or she could do something more, something that acknowledged the magnitude of what Marcus had sacrificed and what she had almost destroyed. Alexandra picked up her phone and composed a text to Marcus. Then she deleted it and wrote another. Then deleted that one too. Finally, she settled on something simple. I received information about your military service today. I shouldn't have looked. I'm sorry for the intrusion, and I'm sorry for the way I treated you Saturday night. What you gave up for your daughter is worth more than any amount of money I could have offered. If there's any way I can make amends beyond the robotics program, please let me know. She sent the message before she could reconsider, then sat waiting for a response that might never come. 20 minutes passed. Then an hour. Alexandra tried to focus on other work, but her attention kept returning to her phone, checking for the message notification that would indicate Marcus had read and responded. Finally, at 6:30 p.m., her phone buzzed. Marcus's response was brief. You don't owe me amends. You kept your word about Lily's program. That's all I asked for. But if you meant what you said about coming to see what she builds, she'd like that. Robotics program meets Saturdays at 10 a.m. You're welcome to visit anytime. Alexandra read the message 3 times, searching for anger or resentment or any indication that Marcus wanted her to suffer for her intrusion. But the text was simply gracious, offering her an opportunity to be part of something good without demanding anything in return. It was the kind of response her father would have called weakness, accepting an apology without extracting payment for the offense. But Alexandra was beginning to understand that her father had been wrong about everything that actually mattered. She responded simply, "I'll be there this Saturday. Then she closed her laptop and left her office earlier than she had in years, driving home through the early evening traffic while thinking about broken crayons and first-place ribbons and the way Marcus had looked at his daughter with love so pure it hurt to witness. That night, Alexandra didn't practice expressions in her mirror. Instead, she sat on her couch with a glass of wine and thought about the choice she had made at 9 years old, the choice to bury her grief and her humanity because her father had told her that emotions were weakness. She thought about all the years she had spent building armor, and she wondered if it was too late to take some of it off. Somewhere across Seattle, Marcus Hayes was probably reading to his daughter before bed. Probably helping with homework or discussing robotics projects or doing all the small, ordinary things that constituted actual love. And Alexandra Sterling, CEO of a multi-million-dollar company, sat alone in her expensive apartment and envied him more than she had ever envied anyone in her life. Saturday arrived with unusual nervousness for Alexandra Sterling. She had navigated hostile board meetings and aggressive negotiations and property acquisitions worth millions of dollars, all without the anxiety that now accompanied her drive to the Seattle Science Center. She had changed her outfit 3 times that morning, rejecting her usual business attire in favor of jeans and a casual sweater that she hoped didn't look like she was trying too hard to appear approachable. She arrived at 9:50 and sat in her car for 5 minutes, gathering her courage in a way she hadn't needed to gather it since her first board presentation 6 years ago. Through the Science Center's glass doors, she could see families arriving, children carrying backpacks and project supplies, parents chatting easily with one another. Alexandra felt profoundly out of place, this 40-year-old woman with no children and no family, about to enter a space where she had no organic role. But she had promised. And Alexandra Sterling might have been many things, ruthless, cold, more comfortable with balance sheets than human connection, but she kept her promises. She entered the building at 9:58 and followed the signs to the robotics program space, a large room filled with work tables and bins of electronic components and half-assembled projects in various states of completion. Perhaps 20 children were present, ranging from about 7 to 12 years old, along with a handful of adults who appeared to be instructors or parent volunteers. Alexandra spotted Lily immediately. The child was at a table near the windows, already working on something with focused intensity, her tongue sticking out slightly in concentration the way children's tongues do when they're deeply absorbed in a task. Marcus stood beside her, leaning over to point at something on her work surface, and their body language spoke of comfortable familiarity and mutual understanding. Alexandra walked toward them, and Marcus noticed her approach first. His expression shifted to surprise, then something that might have been pleasure. Lily looked up a moment later, and her face lit up with genuine delight. "Miss Sterling. You came." Lily abandoned her project and ran over, grabbing Alexandra's hand with the casual physical confidence of a child who hadn't yet learned that not all adults welcome touch. "I'm building a robot arm. Do you want to see?" "I would love to," Alexandra said, and she meant it. She let Lily pull her to the work table, where a partially assembled mechanical arm lay surrounded by servos and wires and a control board covered in neat labels written in a child's handwriting. Lily launched into an explanation of how the arm would work, describing the servo motors and the joint movements and the control scheme with a technical fluency that would have been impressive in a high school student, let alone an 8-year-old. Alexandra listened, asking occasional questions, and she saw Marcus watching his daughter with an expression of pride so profound it was almost painful to witness. The instructor approached after a few minutes, a man in his early 30s wearing a Science Center shirt and an easy smile. "You must be Miss Sterling," he said, extending his hand. "Marcus mentioned you might be visiting. I'm David, the program coordinator. Lily's been talking about you all morning." Alexandra shook his hand, feeling oddly touched that she had been discussed. "Has she been in the program long?" "This is her second session," David said. "But she's already one of the most technically proficient students we have. Her design thinking is remarkable. We had to move her to the advanced group after the first hour because she was helping other kids solve problems their instructors couldn't figure out." He said it casually, but Alexandra saw Marcus's expression tighten slightly, and she understood that he was hearing for the first time just how exceptional his daughter was. Not just talented or good for her age, but genuinely gifted in ways that would require resources and opportunities they couldn't currently afford. The morning progressed with Alexandra sitting at Lily's work table, watching her assemble and program the robot arm with guidance from David and occasional questions to Marcus about specific technical elements. Other parents gave Alexandra curious looks, clearly trying to place her in the family dynamic, but no one asked directly. At 11:30, the program broke for lunch. Most families departed for nearby restaurants, but Marcus had brought sandwiches from home, and Lily led Alexandra outside to a courtyard where they could eat on the benches in the surprisingly warm November sunshine. "This was amazing," Alexandra said as they settled on a bench overlooking the fountain. "What you're building, Lily, it's genuinely impressive work." Lily beamed, taking a bite of her sandwich. "My dad says I'm good with my hands like he is. He can fix anything." Marcus looked uncomfortable with the praise, but before he could deflect, Lily continued with the devastating honesty of children who don't yet understand social filters. "He used to fix really important things. In the Air Force. But then my mom died and he had to take care of me, so now he just fixes things at the store." The words hung in the air between them. Marcus's expression went carefully neutral, the way Alexandra had seen it go when he wanted to hide emotion. She felt the need to say something, to acknowledge what had been revealed, but before she could speak, Lily turned to her with a question that changed everything. "Are you my dad's girlfriend?" The question landed like a bomb in the quiet courtyard. Alexandra felt her face flush. Marcus looked mortified, immediately starting to apologize and explain that Lily didn't understand appropriate questions. But Alexandra held up one hand, stopping him, and she looked at this 8-year-old child with her direct gaze and her innocent assumption that adults who spent time together must be romantically involved. "No," Alexandra said gently. "I'm not your dad's girlfriend. I'm someone who is very grateful to your dad for helping me with a problem, and I'm helping with your robotics program to say thank you." "Oh," Lily said, looking between them with an expression that suggested she didn't entirely believe the explanation but was willing to accept it. "Because my friend Emma's mom has a boyfriend, and he comes to Emma's stuff at school sometimes. And you came to my robotics program. So I thought maybe." Marcus intervened then, gently explaining to Lily that adults could be friends without being romantically involved, that people sometimes helped each other without it meaning anything beyond kindness. Lily listened with the patience of a child who had heard adult explanations before and knew when to stop pushing. But after Lily finished her sandwich and ran off to play near the fountain, leaving Marcus and Alexandra alone on the bench, the question lingered in the space between them. Alexandra found herself thinking about what it would mean to be Marcus's girlfriend, to be part of this small family, to share in the ordinary intimacy she had just witnessed. "She's a remarkable child," Alexandra said quietly, watching Lily chase pigeons with the unself-conscious joy of childhood. "She is," Marcus agreed. "She's the best thing I've ever done." Alexandra turned to look at him, this man who had given up everything for his daughter, who worked minimum wage without complaint, who possessed skills and knowledge that could have made him successful in a dozen different careers if only he'd been willing to prioritize himself over his child. And she understood, perhaps for the first time in her life, what actual strength looked like. "Thank you for letting me come today," Alexandra said. "For letting me be part of this." Marcus met her eyes, and something passed between them that Alexandra couldn't quite name. Gratitude, perhaps. Or recognition. Or the beginning of something neither of them was ready to acknowledge. "Thank you for coming," he said simply. "Lily was so excited when I told her you might visit." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching Lily play, and Alexandra felt something loosen in her chest that had been tight for as long as she could remember. This wasn't her family. She had no claim to this child or this man or these small moments of ordinary happiness. But for a brief time, she could pretend she did, and that pretense felt more valuable than anything in her expensive apartment or her corner office. The afternoon session of the robotics program was shorter, ending at 2 p.m. As families gathered their belongings and departed, Marcus packed up Lily's supplies with practiced efficiency. Alexandra lingered, uncertain if she should leave or offer to help or simply acknowledge that her visit was complete. Lily solved the problem by running over and hugging Alexandra around the waist with sudden, fierce affection. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice muffled against Alexandra's sweater. "Will you come back next week?" Alexandra looked at Marcus, seeking permission. He nodded slightly, and she felt something warm bloom in her chest. "I'll try," she said to Lily. "If that's okay with your dad." "It's okay," Marcus said, and there was something in his voice that suggested it was more than okay, that perhaps he had felt the same sense of unexpected connection that Alexandra had experienced throughout the day. They walked to the parking lot together, and as they reached Alexandra's Mercedes, Lily spotted something that made her gasp with delight. Marcus's old Toyota had a flat tire, clearly recent, the rim sitting at an angle that suggested a catastrophic puncture rather than a slow leak. Marcus swore softly, then apologized to Lily for the language. He walked over to inspect the damage, and Alexandra followed, looking at the tire with the assessment of someone who had been driving expensive cars maintained by other people for most of her adult life. "Do you have a spare?" Alexandra asked. Marcus nodded. "In the trunk. I can change it. It'll just take 20 minutes or so." He was already moving to retrieve the jack and spare tire, his movements efficient despite obvious frustration. Alexandra watched him work for perhaps 30 seconds before making a decision that felt both impulsive and inevitable. "Or you could let me drive you home," she said. "You can come back for the car once you've arranged a tow or whatever you need to do." Marcus looked up from where he was positioning the jack. "That's not necessary. I can handle this." "I know you can," Alexandra said. "But Lily's been here since 10 this morning. She's probably tired. And it's a beautiful day. Let me drive you home." Marcus hesitated, and Alexandra saw him calculating the imposition against the practical benefits. Finally, he nodded. "Okay. Thank you. That's very kind." Kind felt like the wrong word for what Alexandra was feeling as Lily climbed excitedly into the back seat of her Mercedes, chattering about how fancy the car was and asking questions about all the buttons and screens. Marcus gave Alexandra his address, and she programmed it into the navigation system, noting that he lived about 20 minutes away in a neighborhood she had never visited. The drive passed with Lily providing a running commentary on everything they passed, punctuated by questions about Alexandra's car and her job and whether she had any children of her own. Marcus occasionally intervened to tell his daughter she was asking too many personal questions, but Alexandra found she didn't mind. Lily's curiosity was genuine and innocent, without any of the calculated social positioning that characterized most adult conversations. They arrived at Marcus's apartment building, a modest structure in a neighborhood that was safe but clearly working class. Marcus thanked Alexandra again, helping Lily out of the back seat and gathering their bags. But before they could leave, Lily turned back with one more question. "Do you want to come up and see my room? I have all my drawings there. And my robot designs." "Lily," Marcus said gently, "Miss Sterling probably has other things to do today." But Alexandra found herself saying yes before she fully thought through the implications. She parked her Mercedes in a visitor spot and followed Marcus and Lily up 2 flights of stairs to an apartment that was small but immaculately maintained. The living room was barely large enough for a couch and a television, with a small kitchenette visible beyond. But everything was clean and organized, with Lily's drawings displayed on the refrigerator and Marcus's work boots neatly positioned by the door. Alexandra could see into Lily's bedroom, painted a cheerful yellow and filled with a child's treasures, stuffed animals, building blocks, and a desk covered in notebooks and drawings. Lily gave Alexandra a tour with the pride of someone showing off a palace, pointing out her favorite drawings and explaining her various robot designs. Marcus stood in the doorway watching, and Alexandra was acutely aware of how small and humble this space was compared to her penthouse apartment. But there was warmth here that her expensive home completely lacked, evidence of love in every carefully maintained corner. When the tour was complete and Alexandra had admired every drawing and design, she found herself standing in the living room with Marcus while Lily played in her room. The silence between them was comfortable but charged with something unspoken, some acknowledgement of how far they had come from that first night in the convenience store. "Your home is lovely," Alexandra said, and she meant it. "You've made a good life for her." Marcus looked around the small apartment, seeing it perhaps through her eyes. "It's not much," he said. "But it's ours. And she's happy. That's all that matters." Alexandra wanted to say something about how wealth and space didn't equal happiness, about how her penthouse apartment felt empty in a way this small space never would. But before she could find the words, Lily emerged from her bedroom with a drawing she wanted Alexandra to have. "I made this for you," Lily said, holding out a detailed sketch of a robot with wings. "Because you helped me go to robotics." "Thank you." Alexandra took the drawing with hands that trembled slightly. No one had given her original art before, hadn't created something specifically for her in longer than she could remember. "You made this for me?" she asked, her voice tight. Lily nodded seriously. "It's a helper robot. For helping people like you help people. Dad says you're very busy, so I thought you might need help." And there it was, the casual kindness of a child who didn't yet understand that adults didn't usually deserve such generosity. Alexandra knelt down to Lily's level, carefully rolling the drawing so it wouldn't crease. "Thank you," she said, making sure Lily could see how much the gift meant. "This is beautiful. I'm going to put it up in my office." Lily beamed, then spontaneously hugged Alexandra again. "I'm glad you came today. You can come back whenever you want." Alexandra hugged the child back, feeling tears threaten for the second time in a week. When she finally left the apartment and drove home to her expensive, empty penthouse, she carried Lily's drawing like it was made of precious material. That night, Alexandra did something she had never done before. She took down the abstract art that hung behind her desk, a piece that had cost $15,000 and meant nothing to her, and she replaced it with Lily's drawing of the winged robot. She used museum-quality framing tape so it wouldn't damage the paper, and she positioned it where she would see it every time she sat at her desk. Then she sat on her white leather couch and thought about the girlfriend question, and she admitted to herself what she had been avoiding since Saturday night at the convenience store. She was falling for Marcus Hayes. Falling for his quiet strength and his unwavering devotion to his daughter and the way he had walked away from everything without hesitation because love mattered more than pride. But more than that, she was falling for the possibility of being part of something that mattered. Of being someone's helper, the way Lily's robot was designed to help. Of having a purpose beyond quarterly earnings and property acquisitions and proving to a board of directors that she deserved her position. Alexandra picked up her phone and looked at Marcus's contact information. She typed out a message, deleted it, typed another, deleted that too. Finally, she settled on something simple and honest. Thank you for letting me be part of your day. Lily's drawing is now hanging in my office, and I think it might be the most valuable thing in the room. Same time next Saturday? The response came quickly. We'd like that. Both of us. Alexandra read those 3 words, both of us, and felt something shift inside her that had been frozen since her mother died when she was 9 years old. Marcus wasn't just tolerating her presence for Lily's sake. He wanted her there too. And that wanting felt more important than anything Alexandra had achieved in her entire professional life. She fell asleep that night thinking about how Lily had looked playing near the fountain, how Marcus had smiled when his daughter explained her robot designs, how it had felt to be part of something ordinary and precious and completely outside the world of business and power she had inhabited for so long. And when she woke up Sunday morning, the first thing she saw was her reflection in the bathroom mirror, and for the first time in years, the face looking back at her seemed like someone she might actually want to know. 4 weeks passed in a rhythm that became comfortable and then necessary. Every Saturday, Alexandra attended Lily's robotics program. She learned the names of other children in the class, made awkward small talk with other parents who gradually stopped looking at her like she was an alien presence. She watched Lily's skills develop with astonishing speed, saw projects that became more ambitious each week, and she felt pride that had nothing to do with her own accomplishments. Marcus and Alexandra fell into an easy companionship during those Saturday mornings. They would sit together while Lily worked, sometimes talking about technical aspects of whatever she was building, sometimes discussing the week's events, sometimes just existing in comfortable silence. Alexandra found herself looking forward to those moments more than board meetings or successful property acquisitions or any of the things that used to constitute her definition of a good week. She began arriving earlier and staying later. She brought coffee for herself and Marcus, learning without asking that he took it black with 1 sugar. She started recognizing the signs when he was tired from working night shifts, when Lily had kept him up with nightmares, when money was particularly tight even though he never complained. And slowly, carefully, Alexandra began finding ways to help that didn't feel like charity. A casual mention that Sterling Properties was looking for someone with mechanical skills for building maintenance. Did Marcus know anyone? The position paid $23 an hour with benefits and day shift hours. Marcus had looked at her with an expression that said he knew exactly what she was doing, but after a long moment he had applied, and now he worked days maintaining HVAC systems and electrical systems across Sterling Properties' portfolio. The change meant Marcus could be home with Lily in the evenings. It meant health insurance and dental coverage and the ability to afford small luxuries that had been impossible on convenience store wages. It meant dignity in work that actually used his skills. Marcus had thanked Alexandra once, simply and sincerely, and she had responded that she was just hiring the most qualified person for the position, which happened to be true even if her motives weren't entirely professional. They had dinner together twice during those 4 weeks. Once because Marcus insisted on thanking her properly for the job, cooking pasta in his small apartment while Lily showed Alexandra her latest drawings. Once because Alexandra had tickets to a science exhibition at the center and had invited them both, and afterward they had gotten pizza and talked until Lily fell asleep on the restaurant booth with her head on Marcus's shoulder. Both times, Alexandra had felt the weight of the unspoken thing growing between them. The way Marcus's hand would brush hers accidentally and both of them would freeze. The way Lily would look between them with knowing eyes and a small smile. The way Alexandra found herself thinking about this family during board meetings, wondering what Marcus and Lily were doing, whether they were happy, whether there might be space in their lives for someone like her. But neither of them said anything. Marcus because he was cautious and responsible and probably aware that starting something with his employer would complicate everything. Alexandra because she was terrified of wanting something this badly and having it rejected. So they existed in the comfortable tension of almost, and Alexandra told herself that almost was enough. The afternoon that changed everything started ordinarily. It was the 5th Saturday of their routine, and Alexandra had arrived at the science center at her usual time. But Marcus looked more tired than normal, and when Alexandra quietly asked if everything was okay, he admitted that Lily had been up most of the night with a stomach bug. She had insisted on coming to the robotics program anyway, not wanting to miss a session, and Marcus had reluctantly agreed because his daughter's dedication deserved support even when she wasn't feeling her best. Lily worked on her project with determined focus, but Alexandra noticed she was paler than usual, moving more slowly. Halfway through the morning session, the child excused herself to use the bathroom, and when she didn't return after 10 minutes, Marcus went to check on her. He came back looking worried, saying Lily was feeling worse and they should probably go home. Alexandra immediately offered to help, and together they gathered Lily's supplies and prepared to leave. But as they walked toward the exit, heading through the science center's main corridor, everything went wrong at once. A temporary scaffolding structure had been set up in the corridor for maintenance work on the high ceilings. The workers were on lunch break, and the scaffolding stood empty but poorly secured. As Lily walked past it, weak and dizzy from illness, she stumbled. Her hand reached out for balance and grabbed the scaffolding's base support. The structure wobbled. Someone shouted a warning. And Marcus was too far away, 5 steps behind helping with the bags, unable to reach his daughter before several hundred pounds of metal framework began to collapse. But Alexandra was closer. She didn't think. Didn't calculate risk or consider consequences or do any of the careful analysis that usually preceded her decisions. She simply moved, running the 3 steps that separated her from Lily, grabbing the child and pulling her back and away from the falling metal. The scaffolding came down with a tremendous crash, missing Lily by perhaps 2 feet but catching Alexandra's shoulder and arm with enough force to send her stumbling backward. She hit the floor hard, still holding Lily, and pain exploded through her upper body with an intensity that made her vision white out for several seconds. When her sight cleared, Marcus was there, kneeling beside them, his face pale and terrified. His hands moved over Lily first, checking for injuries with the swift efficiency of someone who had been trained in emergency assessment. Finding none, finding his daughter shaken but unhurt, he turned his attention to Alexandra. Her right arm hung at an unnatural angle. Her shoulder was already swelling. Blood seeped through her sweater from where the metal had torn skin. But she was aware enough to see Lily crying, to feel Marcus's hands gentle on her injured shoulder, to hear the science center staff calling for an ambulance. "You saved her," Marcus said, and his voice was breaking. "You ran toward falling metal and you saved my daughter." Alexandra wanted to respond, to tell him that of course she had run toward danger, that there had never been another choice, that Lily mattered more than her own safety. But the pain was overwhelming now, and she couldn't form words. She could only look at Marcus's face, at the tears streaming down his cheeks, at the way he was looking at her like she had done something extraordinary instead of something inevitable. Lily was clinging to her father but reaching for Alexandra with one small hand. "You came," the child was saying through tears. "You saved me. You saved me like the helper robot." The ambulance arrived within minutes. Paramedics assessed Alexandra's injuries and determined she needed immediate hospital transport. Marcus insisted on riding with her, arranging for another parent to take Lily home with a promise to pick her up as soon as possible. And Alexandra, drifting in and out of clarity as the paramedics administered pain medication, felt Marcus's hand holding hers and heard him saying words that she would remember even through the fog of medication. "I couldn't let them lose you too," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I couldn't let Lily lose someone else she loves. I couldn't lose you." The words were incomplete, trailing off into emotion he couldn't articulate. But Alexandra understood what he meant. Understood that at some point during these 5 Saturdays and 2 dinners and dozens of small moments, they had become something to each other. That Lily had claimed Alexandra as hers in the way children claim the adults they trust. That Marcus had been falling just as she had, careful and slow but inevitable. At the hospital, they discovered Alexandra had a broken collarbone, a dislocated shoulder, a mild concussion, and multiple lacerations requiring stitches. The treatment took hours, and Marcus waited through all of it. When they finally released her with pain medication and strict instructions to rest, he was there to help her to his car, to drive her home, to make sure she could get into her apartment safely. Lily was waiting there, having been brought by the parent who had taken her home. The child ran to Alexandra the moment the door opened, careful of the injuries but needing to confirm that her helper robot was okay. And Alexandra, exhausted and hurting and probably still affected by pain medication, knelt down to Lily's level despite the pain it caused and let herself be hugged with desperate relief. "I've got you," Alexandra whispered into Lily's hair. "You're okay. We're both okay." When Lily finally released her, Marcus helped Alexandra to the couch, and the three of them sat together in a tight configuration that spoke of shared trauma and profound relief. No one spoke. They simply existed together, breathing, present, alive. Eventually Lily fell asleep, curled against Alexandra's uninjured side. Marcus sat on Alexandra's other side, his shoulder touching hers, and when Alexandra turned her head to look at him, she saw tears streaming down his face again. "Thank you," he said, his voice raw. "Thank you for being there. Thank you for not hesitating. Thank you for loving her enough to run toward danger." Alexandra reached across with her good hand and wiped away his tears with her thumb. "I didn't think," she said honestly. "I just knew I couldn't let anything hurt her." Marcus caught her hand and held it against his cheek. "That's love," he said simply. "That's what love looks like." And there, in Alexandra's expensive apartment with Lily sleeping between them and the evidence of injury visible in bandages and bruises, something fundamental shifted into place. They were no longer dancing around what they felt, no longer existing in the comfortable tension of almost. They were acknowledging it, naming it, letting it be real. When Lily woke up an hour later, she looked at the two adults who had been watching her sleep, and she said with absolute certainty, "You're my dad's girlfriend now, right? Because you saved me." That's what people do when they love someone. Marcus and Alexandra looked at each other, and something passed between them that needed no words. Then Marcus spoke carefully, honestly, to his daughter. "I think Miss Sterling and I need to talk about that. But you're right that what she did today was because she loves you. We both love you. That's the most important thing." Lily seemed satisfied with that answer, and she snuggled back against Alexandra with the easy trust of a child who knew she was safe. But Alexandra saw the question in Marcus's eyes, the hope and fear and uncertainty of someone who wanted something but didn't know if wanting it was allowed. "Yes," Alexandra said quietly, answering the question Marcus hadn't asked. "Yes, I want to be part of this. Part of you. Part of her. Part of this family, if you'll have me." Marcus's breath caught. Then he leaned over his sleeping daughter and kissed Alexandra softly, carefully, mindful of her injuries but unable to contain the emotion anymore. And when they broke apart, both of them were crying, and Lily was smiling in her sleep like she had known all along how this would end. That night, Marcus and Lily stayed at Alexandra's apartment. Marcus insisted on sleeping on the couch so he could help if Alexandra needed anything during the night. Lily slept in Alexandra's guest room, which had never been used before and which Alexandra promised they would decorate however Lily wanted. And Alexandra lay in her bed, her shoulder aching and her body exhausted, and felt more complete than she had ever felt in her entire life. She had found what she didn't know she was looking for. A family. A purpose. A reason to be human instead of just competent. The helper robot drawing hung on her office wall. But tonight, Alexandra understood that she wasn't the helper. She had been the one who needed saving, rescued from a life of empty accomplishment by a man who had given up everything for love and a child who had shown her what actually mattered. Alexandra fell asleep thinking about Saturday mornings and robot designs and the way Marcus's hand had felt holding hers in the ambulance. And for the first time since her mother died when she was 9 years old, she dreamed about a future that included love and laughter and small hands reaching for hers with absolute trust. 6 months passed in a transformation so profound that when Alexandra looked back at who she had been before that night in the convenience store, she barely recognized herself. The woman who had made cruel bets and practiced expressions in mirrors felt like someone from another lifetime, someone who had existed before she understood what actually mattered. Marcus and Lily didn't move into Alexandra's penthouse, despite her offers. Marcus wanted to maintain some independence, some sense that he was providing for his daughter through his own work rather than depending on Alexandra's wealth. But they stayed over frequently, enough that Alexandra's spare bedroom became Lily's room in earnest, decorated with robot posters and a desk covered in building supplies and drawings that Alexandra treasured like other people treasured fine art. The relationship developed slowly, carefully, with attention to Lily's needs and emotions above everything else. They told Lily that they were dating, that sometimes when adults cared about each other they wanted to spend more time together. Lily had accepted this with the pragmatism of a child who had suspected it all along, and she had only one question. Does this mean Alexandra will be at my birthday party? The birthday party had been 2 months ago, held at the Seattle Science Center's robotics lab with 20 children and a cake shaped like a robot. Alexandra had helped plan it, had watched Marcus's face when he saw how happy his daughter was, had felt integrated into this family in a way that made her previous life seem hollow and pointless. But tonight was different. Tonight was bigger than birthday parties or Saturday robotics programs or the dozens of small moments that had woven Alexandra into the fabric of this family. Tonight was the realization of something that had started as a simple request for a child's education and had grown into something that could change hundreds of lives. They stood together in the lobby of a modern building in South Seattle, the three of them plus several dozen other people, waiting for the ceremony to begin. The building had been an abandoned warehouse 6 months ago. Now it was a fully equipped youth makerspace, with robotics equipment and 3D printers and computers and workshop areas and everything a child interested in engineering and technology could possibly need. The Sterling Hayes Foundation for Young Innovators. Named for both families, funded by Alexandra's money but directed by a board that included Marcus, educators, community leaders, and young people who understood what underserved kids needed. The foundation would provide free programming to children from low-income families, offering the resources and mentorship and opportunities that talent alone couldn't access. It had been Marcus's idea initially. 6 weeks after the scaffolding accident, after Alexandra's shoulder had healed enough for her to return to work, they had been talking about Lily's progress in the robotics program. Marcus had mentioned how many talented kids never got access to programs like this, how many potential engineers and inventors and problem solvers were lost because they couldn't afford $100 monthly fees or $80 toolkits. What if we changed that, Alexandra had said, the idea forming even as she spoke. What if we used Sterling Properties resources to create something that removed those barriers? The conversation had continued for hours, Marcus offering practical insights about what kids needed and Alexandra providing business strategy and funding. They had drafted a proposal that night, sitting at Alexandra's kitchen table while Lily slept in the next room, and by morning they had the skeleton of something that could actually work. It had taken 6 months to make it real. 6 months of property acquisition and renovation and program development and hiring staff and navigating the bureaucracy of nonprofit formation. But tonight, finally, they were opening the doors to the first class. 120 children from underserved communities across Seattle, ranging from ages 7 to 14, all selected based on demonstrated interest in building and creating and solving problems. Lily was among them, not because of Alexandra's money or Marcus's connection, but because she had applied like everyone else and been selected based on her portfolio of designs and had demonstrated passion for engineering. She wore a new dress for the occasion, blue with pockets, and she carried a folder containing the robot designs she planned to work on during the program. The mayor was there. Local news cameras. Representatives from tech companies who had donated equipment and pledged mentorship support. Board members and community leaders and dozens of parents who had brought their children with hope that this program might open doors that had previously been closed. But Alexandra wasn't thinking about any of them. She was thinking about the small boy she had seen 6 months ago in the convenience store, counting pennies for a sandwich. She was thinking about Lily working on her competition entry by inadequate lighting with broken crayons. She was thinking about all the children who had talent and passion but no access, no opportunity, no chance to develop gifts that could change the world. The ceremony began with speeches. The mayor talked about opportunity and equity. A board member discussed the foundation's mission. Then it was Alexandra's turn to speak, and she walked to the podium with Marcus and Lily watching from the front row. 6 months ago, Alexandra began, her voice carrying through the space, I made a bet with someone in a convenience store. It was a cruel bet, designed to protect my ego and demonstrate my power. I offered him money to fix a problem I couldn't solve, and I structured the terms in a way that would humiliate him regardless of whether he succeeded or failed. The crowd stirred, uncertain where this was going. Alexandra saw confusion on several faces, curiosity on others. But Marcus was smiling slightly, knowing what was coming. He succeeded, Alexandra continued. He fixed the problem in less than 4 hours, something 2 licensed contractors couldn't do in 8. And when I offered him the $10,000 I had promised, he refused. Instead, he asked for something worth about $380. He asked me to pay for his daughter's robotics program, to buy her the toolkit she needed to develop her talents, to turn on the lights so she could work properly instead of struggling in the dark with inadequate materials. Alexandra paused, finding Lily's face in the crowd. That request changed my life, she said. It taught me that some things matter more than money or power or proving you're smarter than other people. It taught me that actual strength isn't about dominating others, it's about lifting them up. And it taught me that the best investment you can make is in a child's potential. She gestured to Marcus. The man I made that bet with is Marcus Hayes. He's now the Foundation's technical director. The daughter he asked me to help is Lily Hayes, who is one of the young innovators starting in tonight's program. And together, we've built something that I hope will help 120 children develop their gifts, and eventually thousands more. The speech continued with practical details about the program, the schedule, the equipment available, the expectations for students. But Alexandra's heart wasn't in the logistics. Her heart was with the children in the audience, especially the ones who looked overwhelmed or out of place or uncertain if they really belonged here. After the speeches concluded, after the ribbon was cut and the doors officially opened, the children and their families toured the facility. Alexandra watched them explore the equipment, saw the way their faces lit up when they realized all of this was available to them, heard the excited chatter about projects they could build and problems they could solve. Lily gave tours to anyone who would listen, pointing out the different areas with the pride of someone who had helped plan them. Marcus stood with a group of parents, answering questions about the program requirements and reassuring nervous mothers that their children would be safe and supported. And Alexandra moved through the crowd, watching this thing they had built together come to life. At one point, she found herself standing near the window that overlooked the workshop area. The sun was setting, casting golden light through the glass, illuminating rows of workbenches and equipment that would soon be covered with partially completed projects and the evidence of young minds learning to create. Marcus appeared beside her, his shoulder touching hers in the familiar way that had become their private language. "We did it," he said quietly. "We actually made this real." "You did it," Alexandra corrected. "This was your idea. Your vision. I just provided the funding." Marcus turned to face her, and his expression was serious in a way that made Alexandra's heart beat faster. "Don't diminish what you contributed," he said. "This exists because you were willing to change. Because you looked at who you were and decided to become someone different. That's harder than writing a check, Alexandra. That's actual transformation." Before Alexandra could respond, Lily appeared with another child in tow, a girl about her age who was shyly asking questions about the 3D printers. Lily introduced her as Sophia, her new friend from the program, and asked if Alexandra could show them how the printers worked. Alexandra spent the next 20 minutes giving an impromptu tutorial, learning as much from the children's questions as they learned from her answers. When the families finally began to depart, promising to return for the first official session later that week, Marcus and Alexandra and Lily were among the last to leave. They stood in the empty lobby, the three of them, looking at the sign above the entrance that bore both their family names. "I'm proud of you," Marcus said to Lily. "The way you welcomed Sophia, the way you helped other kids feel comfortable. That's what this place is about. Helping each other." Lily nodded seriously. "Like you and Alexandra help each other. Like families do." The word families hung in the air between them. Alexandra and Marcus hadn't discussed marriage or permanent commitment or any of the formal structures that would make them a legal family. They had been dating for 5 months, building something careful and deliberate and focused on Lily's well-being above everything else. But standing in the lobby of the foundation they had created together, Alexandra felt the moment arriving like something inevitable. She looked at Marcus and saw the same recognition in his eyes, the understanding that they had already become a family in every way that mattered except the legal ones. "Can we talk?" Marcus asked quietly, and Alexandra nodded. They drove Lily back to Marcus's apartment, where his mother was waiting to watch her for the evening. Then Marcus drove them to a park overlooking Puget Sound, the same park where he and Sarah had taken Lily years ago, before the accident that changed everything. They sat on a bench watching the sunset paint the water in shades of gold and orange, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. Then Marcus took Alexandra's hand and said the words that would change everything. "I need to tell you about something that happened 3 years ago," he began. "About a promise I made to myself after Sarah died." Alexandra waited, holding his hand, giving him space to speak. "I promised I would never love anyone more than I loved Lily," Marcus continued. "That she would always come first, that I would never let a relationship take priority over being her father. It was a promise born out of grief and fear, and I've kept it rigidly for 3 years. He turned to look at Alexandra, and there were tears in his eyes. "But the thing I've learned in the last 6 months is that the promise was wrong. Or rather, I was wrong about what it meant. Because loving you doesn't take anything away from loving Lily. It adds to it. It makes me a better father because I'm a more complete person." Alexandra felt her own tears starting. "Marcus," she whispered. "You saved my daughter's life," he continued. You ran toward falling metal without hesitation because you loved her enough to put her safety above your own. You've spent 6 months becoming part of our family, not trying to replace Sarah but creating your own relationship with Lily based on who you are and who she is. You've changed your entire life, walked away from the person you were, because you decided that love mattered more than power. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Alexandra's breath caught. I don't have much to offer you, Marcus said, opening the box to reveal a simple ring, no expensive diamond, just a single band of silver. I'm a maintenance worker with a daughter and a lot of baggage from a marriage that ended in tragedy. But I love you. Completely. And I want to build a life with you. Will you marry me? Alexandra looked at the ring, this simple band that probably cost less than her monthly car payment. Then she looked at Marcus, this man who had sacrificed everything for his daughter, who had taught her what strength really meant, who had shown her how to be human instead of just successful. Yes, she said, and the word came out choked with tears. Yes, I'll marry you. I'll marry both of you. Marcus slipped the ring on her finger, and they kissed there on the bench overlooking the water as the sun set and the city lights began to sparkle. When they finally broke apart, both of them were crying and laughing at once. There's one more thing, Marcus said. I need you to know that I wanted to ask you this before tonight, before the foundation opened. I didn't want you to think this was about gratitude or what you'd built or anything except how I feel about you. I bought this ring 2 weeks ago and I've been carrying it around waiting for the right moment. Alexandra kissed him again, stopping the words. I know, she said. I've always known. You don't need to explain. They sat together watching the lights come on across the city, and Alexandra thought about the journey that had brought them here. A cruel bet in a convenience store. A child counting pennies. A choice to ask for something worthwhile instead of something valuable. All of it leading to this moment, this family, this life that neither of them had been looking for but both of them desperately needed. When they returned to Marcus's apartment to share the news with Lily and Marcus's mother, the child's reaction was pure joy. Does this mean you'll live with us? She asked, bouncing with excitement. Or we'll live with you. Or we'll get a new place together. We'll figure that out, Marcus said, but yes. We'll all be together. Lily threw her arms around both of them, and Alexandra felt the completeness of this moment, this family that had formed against all probability. A CEO and a maintenance worker and a gifted child, bound together by choices that put love above everything else. That night, after Lily had finally gone to bed and Marcus's mother had departed with tears of happiness, Marcus and Alexandra sat together on his worn couch in his small apartment. Alexandra looked around the space that had once seemed impossibly humble, and now it felt like the most important place in the world. I need to tell you something too, she said. About my father and what he taught me about strength and weakness. Marcus pulled her closer, and she told him everything. About her mother's death. About her father's lessons. About the years she had spent building armor and practicing expressions and becoming someone who confused power with worth. About how she had been drowning in that life until a man in a convenience store showed her what it looked like to choose love over pride. Your father was wrong, Marcus said when she finished. About all of it. Strength isn't staying in the sky, untouched and unreachable. Strength is knowing when to come down for someone else. The words settled into Alexandra's chest like something she had been waiting her whole life to hear. She looked at Marcus, this man who had literally come down from his career and his life for his daughter, and she understood that she had found what she never knew she needed. Not someone to rescue her, but someone to show her how to rescue herself. They talked for hours that night, planning a future that included all three of them. A wedding small and meaningful. A home large enough for Lily to have space for her projects but not so large it felt empty. Continued work with the foundation, expanding it to serve more children. Simple, ordinary dreams about homework and dinner together and Saturday mornings spent watching a child build robots that might change the world. And when Marcus finally walked Alexandra to her car in the early morning hours, he kissed her one more time under the street lights and said the words that would become their promise to each other. We're all coming home now. All of us. Together. Alexandra drove back to her penthouse apartment with a simple silver ring on her finger and a heart fuller than she had ever imagined possible. And when she walked into her empty apartment for what felt like the last time it would truly be empty, she looked at Lily's drawing of the helper robot still hanging behind her desk, and she understood that she hadn't saved anyone. She had been saved. By a child's kindness. By a father's example. By the possibility of becoming someone better than the person she had been. The helper robot smiled from the wall, its wings spread wide, and Alexandra smiled back. Then she began planning how to transform this sterile penthouse into a home where a family could actually live. 1 year after the night in the convenience store, On a Saturday morning in November with rain drumming against the windows, Alexandra Sterling stood in front of her bathroom mirror and tried to remember the last time she had practiced expressions. It had been months, perhaps close to a year, since she had felt the need to rehearse being human. Now she simply was human, flawed and uncertain, and more genuinely happy than she had ever been in her carefully controlled previous life. The wedding was tomorrow. Small ceremony at the Seattle Science Center, just family and close friends, held in the lobby of the foundation that had brought them all together. Lily had insisted on the location, arguing that they should get married in the place that proved people could change and build better things together. Neither Marcus nor Alexandra had been able to argue with that logic. Today was the foundation's one-year anniversary celebration. 120 children had become 350, with plans to expand to 500 by next year. They had partnerships with 3 local universities now, mentorship programs with major tech companies, and a placement rate that had exceeded every projection. 4 to 7 children from the initial cohort had won scholarships to specialized summer programs. 12 had competed in national robotics competitions. And every single one of them had access to resources and opportunities they wouldn't have had otherwise. Alexandra had stepped down as CEO of Sterling Properties 6 months ago. She remained on the board and owned significant shares, but the daily operations were now handled by someone who actually wanted that life. Alexandra's full-time work was with the foundation, and she had never been happier or more exhausted or more certain that she was doing exactly what she was supposed to be doing with her life. The anniversary celebration was scheduled for 2 p.m., giving the morning for final preparations. But at 10:30, Marcus called with an edge to his voice that made Alexandra's stomach clench. "Can you come to the foundation building?" he asked. "There's something you need to see." Alexandra drove there immediately, her mind racing through possibilities. A problem with tomorrow's wedding setup. An issue with tonight's event. Some crisis with the building or the programs or any of the 1,000 things that could go wrong. But when she arrived, Marcus was standing in the lobby with an expression that wasn't worry or stress. It was something else. Something that looked almost mischievous. "What's wrong?" Alexandra asked. "Nothing's wrong," Marcus said. "But there's something I need to show you. Something I've been working on with Lily for the past 3 months. He led her through the building to the workshop area, and Alexandra saw that a section had been curtained off, marked with a sign that said "Private Project, Do Not Enter." Marcus pulled back the curtain, and Alexandra saw what they had been building. It was a robot. Life-sized, perhaps 5 feet tall, with articulated arms and a support structure and design elements that were immediately recognizable. It was Lily's robot from the first drawing, the one she had submitted to the art competition a year ago, the helper robot designed to assist people with limited mobility. But this wasn't a drawing. This was real. Fully functional, built from metal and servos and control systems, with Lily's name engraved on a small plate at its base. Alexandra stood staring at it, unable to process that her 8-year-old daughter-to-be and Marcus had actually constructed this remarkable machine. "We built it together," Marcus said quietly. "All 3 of us, actually. Lily designed it. I handled the technical assembly. But we used funding you set up through the Foundation's Advanced Projects program. This robot exists because of everything we created together." Alexandra walked around the robot, examining the detail work, the way every joint moved smoothly, the way the support structures were positioned exactly as Lily had drawn them a year ago with broken crayons on notebook paper. "Can it actually help people?" she asked. Marcus nodded. "We've been testing it with volunteers from the community center. It can retrieve items from high shelves, help someone stand from a seated position, provide support for walking. It's not perfect, but it works. And Lily has already designed version 2 with improvements based on the testing feedback." "Where is Lily?" Alexandra asked, still trying to absorb what she was seeing. "Getting ready for tonight," Marcus said. "But she wanted me to show you this now. She wanted you to see that the drawing you hung in your office became real. That you helped make it real." Alexandra felt tears starting. Marcus stepped closer, putting his arms around her, and she leaned against him while trying to process the magnitude of what this robot represented. It was proof that children with access and support could create remarkable things. Proof that the foundation was fulfilling its mission. Proof that the choice Marcus had made a year ago, asking for Lily's education instead of cash payment, had led to something that could actually help people. "There's one more thing," Marcus said. "The robot has a name. Lily programmed it herself, and she wants you to activate it for the first time at tonight's celebration." "What's it called?" Alexandra asked. Marcus smiled. "Sarah." The name hit Alexandra with unexpected force. Marcus had named the robot after his first wife, after Lily's mother, after the woman whose death had set all of this in motion. It was acknowledgement and honoring and moving forward all at once, and Alexandra understood the profound gift Marcus was giving her by allowing this connection. She would have loved this, Alexandra said quietly. Sarah. She would have been so proud of Lily. She would have loved you, Marcus said, and his voice was firm. For saving our daughter. For showing her what's possible. For becoming part of our family. Sarah would have wanted Lily to have someone like you in her life. Alexandra kissed him then. They're in the workshop surrounded by partially completed projects and the evidence of young minds learning to create. And when they broke apart, both of them were crying but also smiling, because grief and joy could exist together, because honoring the past didn't mean being trapped by it. The afternoon passed in final preparations. Tables arranged in the lobby. Catering set up coordinated. Sound system tested. 350 children and their families would be arriving in a few hours, along with board members and donors and community partners. The mayor was scheduled to speak. Local news would cover the event. Everything had to be perfect. But at 6 p.m., 2 hours before the celebration was scheduled to begin, Lily appeared at Alexandra's side with an unusual request. Can we go somewhere quiet? She asked. Just you and me? I need to talk to you about something. Alexandra's heart clenched with immediate worry, but she followed Lily to a small conference room away from the preparations. They sat together on a couch, and Lily looked at her with those two knowing eyes that sometimes made it easy to forget she was only 9 years old. Tomorrow you're going to marry my dad, Lily said, and it wasn't a question. Yes, Alexandra confirmed. If that's still okay with you. It's okay, Lily said. Better than okay. But I wanted to ask you something before it happens. Something important. Alexandra waited, giving the child space to find her words. When you marry my dad, Lily continued, her voice careful and serious, does that make you my mom? Or are you something else? Because I had a mom, and she died, and I don't really remember her very much. But I love you, and I don't know what to call that. The question opened something in Alexandra's chest that hurt and healed simultaneously. She took Lily's hands in hers and chose her words with extreme care. I can't be your first mom, she said. That was Sarah, and she loved you more than anything in the world. She gave you life, and that's something that will always belong to her. But if you want me to be your second mom, I would be honored. So honored. I love you like you're my own daughter, Lily. That's not going to change whether you call me Alexandra or mom or anything else. Lily considered this for a long moment. Can I call you both? She asked. Alexandra when I'm talking about you to other people, but mom when it's just us? Because you do mom things. You come to my robotics competitions. You help with my homework. You make sure I eat vegetables even when I don't want to. That's what moms do. Alexandra felt tears streaming down her face. Yes, she said. You can call me whatever feels right. And I promise I will always do mom things. Always. Lily hugged her then, fierce and tight and full of the uncomplicated love that children gave when they felt safe. And when she pulled back, she had one more thing to say. My first mom would have liked you, she said with absolute certainty. Dad told me she wanted me to be happy and to have people who loved me. You make Dad happy. You make me happy. So I think she would have been glad you're here. The simple wisdom of a 9-year-old, delivered with perfect clarity. Alexandra held Lily for another long moment, and she thought about Sarah, this woman she had never met but whose presence had shaped everything. She made a silent promise to the ghost of Marcus's first wife, I will take care of them. I will love them as much as you did. I will make sure Lily knows she was yours first and that matters. When they returned to the lobby, the first families were already arriving. Children ran to examine the equipment and greet friends they had made through the program. Parents clustered in conversation, sharing stories about their kids' projects and accomplishments. Board members arrived and began mingling, and Alexandra stepped into her role as foundation director, greeting people and making sure everything ran smoothly. At 8 p.m., the formal program began. The mayor spoke about opportunity and community investment. A board member discussed the foundation's growth and plans for expansion. Then Marcus took the podium, and Alexandra saw him transform from the quiet maintenance worker she had met a year ago into someone confident and articulate, speaking about the importance of giving children access regardless of their family's economic situation. Then it was Alexandra's turn. She walked to the podium and looked out at 350 children and their families, all of them connected by this program that had started with a simple request for robotics fees and a toolkit. A year ago, Alexandra began, I thought I understood what success looked like. Money, power, control, proving I was smarter and stronger than anyone who doubted me. I ran a multi-million-dollar company, lived in an expensive apartment, and had everything that was supposed to matter. She paused, finding Marcus and Lily in the front row. But I was wrong about all of it. Because success isn't about what you accumulate or control. It's about what you create and who you help and whether you make the world better for people you'll never meet. This foundation, these 350 children, that's success. And I only found it because a man in a convenience store taught me that some things matter more than money. The speech continued with practical updates about the foundation's programs and future plans. But then Alexandra deviated from her prepared remarks. Before we conclude tonight, she said, I want to introduce someone special. Lily Hayes, would you please join me? Lily walked to the podium with the confidence of a child who had learned she belonged in spaces like this. She stood beside Alexandra, and together they explained the robot project, how Lily's original drawing had become a functional machine, how this represented exactly what the foundation was designed to do. Then they wheeled out the robot, and Lily demonstrated its functions for the crowd. The articulated arms reaching high shelves. The support structure helping someone stand. The smooth movements that came from months of programming and refinement. Parents in the audience began crying as they recognized what this could mean for family members with mobility challenges. Children watched with awe, seeing what was possible when talent met opportunity. The robot's name is Sarah, Lily said into the microphone, her voice clear and proud. Named after my first mom, who died when I was little. She would have wanted me to build things that help people. So that's what I did. The applause that followed was thunderous. But Alexandra wasn't watching the crowd. She was watching Marcus, who had tears streaming down his face as he looked at his daughter demonstrating a robot named after his first wife, proving that grief could transform into something beautiful and useful and good. After the formal program concluded, the celebration continued with food and music and children showing off their various projects to anyone who would watch. Alexandra moved through the crowd in a daze, accepting congratulations about both the foundation's success and tomorrow's wedding, trying to be present while her mind kept returning to the robot named Sarah and what it represented. At 10 p.m., as families began to depart, Marcus found Alexandra standing alone near the windows overlooking the workshop area. He put his arms around her from behind, and they stood together watching the last few children reluctantly pack up their projects. Tomorrow, Marcus said quietly, I'm going to marry you in front of everyone we love. But tonight, right now, I want to do something that's just for us. He turned her to face him, and his expression was serious and tender. A year ago, I made a bet with you. You structured it so that if I succeeded, you would kiss me. But I succeeded and I refused the reward because I wanted something that actually mattered. Do you remember? Alexandra nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. Well, Marcus continued, I'd like to change the terms of that bet. I'd like the kiss now. Not because I fixed your HVAC system. Not because of anything I did or you did. Just because I love you and I want to kiss my wife the night before our wedding in the place where we built something that matters. He cupped her face in his hands, and Alexandra felt herself falling into his eyes, this man who had taught her everything worth knowing about strength and sacrifice and love. But before she could lean in, before their lips could meet, she pulled back slightly. Wait, she said, and she saw concern flicker across Marcus's face. I need to say something first, Alexandra continued. A year ago, I made that bet because I was terrified of being exposed as inadequate. I structured it to humiliate you because I thought cruelty was the same as strength. I was wrong about everything, Marcus. But you were right. You saw that I needed something more valuable than money, even if I didn't see it myself. She took his hands in hers. This kiss, right now, it's not because of any bet or reward or transaction. It's because you showed me how to be human. Because you gave up everything for your daughter and taught me what love actually looks like. Because you let me into your family and trusted me with the most precious thing in your world. I love you. I love Lily. I love this life we've built together. That's why I want this kiss. Marcus's response was to pull her close and kiss her with a gentleness that somehow contained the entire year they had spent building toward this moment. It wasn't passionate or desperate or any of the things first kisses were supposed to be. It was steady and sure and full of promise, the kiss of two people who had found each other against all probability and chosen to build something lasting. When they finally broke apart, both of them were crying again. Then Lily's voice came from behind them, Are you two kissing? Before you're even married? That's against the rules. They turned to find Lily standing there with Marcus's mother, both of them grinning. We came back to get the robot, Marcus's mother explained. Didn't mean to interrupt. You're not interrupting, Alexandra said, holding out her hand to Lily. Come here. Family hug. The four of them stood together in the empty foundation lobby, Marcus and Alexandra and Lily and Marcus's mother, holding each other while the city lights sparkled through the windows. And Alexandra understood that this was her family now, these people who had taught her that strength came from love and that success was measured in the lives you touched rather than the money you accumulated. Tomorrow they would have the wedding. Friends and family would gather, vows would be spoken, legal documents would be signed. But tonight, in this moment, Alexandra felt more married than any ceremony could make her. They were bound already, the three of them, soon to be four when the adoption papers were finalized, connected by choices that prioritized love over everything else. As they prepared to leave the building, turning off lights and setting the security system, Alexandra took one last look at the foundation lobby. The tables from tonight's celebration were already being cleared by the catering staff. The robot named Sarah stood in its corner, ready to be demonstrated again at future events. And on the wall near the entrance hung a framed copy of Lily's original drawing, the one she had done with broken crayons and notebook paper, the one that had started everything. From that drawing to this reality, Alexandra thought. From a cruel bet in a convenience store to a family standing together in a building that changed lives. The distance seemed impossible, but they had traveled it one choice at a time, one Saturday morning at a time, one moment of choosing love over pride at a time. Marcus locked the door behind them, and they walked to their cars in the rain. Tomorrow was the wedding. Next week Lily would start in an advanced engineering program for gifted students. Next month the foundation would open applications for its second location. The future stretched before them full of possibility and purpose. But tonight, Alexandra drove home to the house they now shared, the one that was big enough for Lily's projects but small enough to feel like a home, and she felt complete in a way she had never felt in her penthouse apartment or her corner office. She had a family. She had work that mattered. She had learned to be human instead of just competent. And when she checked on Lily before going to bed, finding the child already asleep with robot designs scattered across her desk, Alexandra whispered the words she had never thought she would get to say, "Good night, sweetheart. Mom loves you." The word mom felt strange and wonderful in her mouth. Tomorrow it would become official with the wedding. In 3 months it would become legal with the adoption. But tonight, spoken quietly in a dark bedroom to a sleeping child who had claimed her as family, it was already real. Alexandra returned to her own bedroom where Marcus was already in bed, and she climbed in beside him. He pulled her close, and they lay together in comfortable silence, listening to the rain against the windows. "Tomorrow," Marcus said softly, "you become my wife." "Tomorrow," Alexandra corrected, "I become official. But I've been yours for a while now. Both of yours." Marcus kissed her forehead. "Best bet I ever made," he said. "Even if I did refuse the original terms." "Best bet I ever lost," Alexandra responded. "Turns out getting exactly what I asked for would have been the worst thing that could have happened. What I needed was what you gave me instead." They fell asleep holding each other, and for the first time in longer than Alexandra could remember, she didn't dream about board meetings or property acquisitions or proving her worth to people who would never be satisfied. She dreamed about Saturday mornings and robot competitions and a small girl in a blue dress asking if she could call Alexandra Mom, when it was just them. And in her dream, Sarah was there too, Marcus's first wife, Lily's first mother, the woman whose death had set everything in motion. She was smiling and nodding and giving her blessing to this strange, unlikely family that had formed in the wake of tragedy. "Thank you," Alexandra said to her in the dream. "For loving them first. For teaching them what love looks like. I promise I'll take care of them." Sarah's response was simple, "I know you will. That's why I sent you to each other." Alexandra woke in the early morning darkness with tears on her face and Marcus still sleeping beside her. She quietly got up and walked to Lily's room, standing in the doorway watching her daughter-to-be sleep. The child who had counted pennies and won competitions and built robots and asked the girlfriend question. The child who had given her a drawing of a helper robot and somehow known that Alexandra was the one who needed saving. Tomorrow Alexandra Sterling would become Alexandra Hayes. She would marry a man who had given up everything for love and gained something more valuable than anything he had sacrificed. She would officially become mother to a 9-year-old engineering prodigy who drew blueprints and asked profound questions and loved without reservation. But standing in that doorway in the pre-dawn darkness, Alexandra understood that the transformation had already happened. She had already fallen. Had already been caught. Had already learned that the only thing worth holding onto was the people you loved and the chance to make the world better for someone else. The helper robot drawing still hung in her office at the foundation. But Alexandra understood now that she hadn't been the helper. She had been helped. By a child's kindness. By a father's example. by the possibility of becoming someone better than the person she had been. And as the sun began to rise over Seattle, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange, Alexandra Sterling stood in a doorway watching her family sleep, and she knew with absolute certainty that she had found exactly what she never knew she was looking for. The wedding took place at 2 p.m. in the foundation lobby, exactly as Lily had insisted. The space had been transformed with simple elegance, white chairs arranged in rows, flowers that Lily had helped choose, and the robot named Sarah standing in a place of honor near the ceremony space, a silent witness to everything this family had become. Alexandra stood in a small preparation room wearing a dress that was elegant but not ostentatious, white but not traditional, perfect for a woman getting married for the first time at 41 to a man who had already loved and lost once before. Her hands shook slightly as she adjusted her hair, and she realized with surprise that she was nervous. Not about marrying Marcus, she had never been more certain of anything, but about the ceremony itself, about standing in front of people and making promises that felt almost too sacred to speak aloud. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," Alexandra called, expecting Marcus's mother or one of the few friends she had invited. But it was Lily who entered, wearing her own new dress, blue with pockets, because some things were tradition, and carrying something wrapped in tissue paper. She walked over to Alexandra with unusual solemnity and held out the package. "I made you something," Lily said. "For today. Because you're going to be my mom now, officially, and I wanted you to have something special." Alexandra unwrapped the tissue paper with careful hands and found a drawing, but not just any drawing. This one was done on good paper with professional colored pencils, showing 3 figures holding hands under a sky full of stars. The detail work was remarkable, each figure carefully rendered with distinctive features. On the left was Marcus, unmistakably him despite the simplified style. On the right was Alexandra, her hair and dress captured perfectly. And in the middle, holding both their hands, was Lily. But it was the background that made Alexandra's breath catch. Behind the 3 figures, rendered in delicate lines, was a 4th figure watching over them. A woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile, drawn with love and loss and acceptance. "That's my first mom," Lily said, pointing to the 4th figure. "Sarah. I wanted her in the picture because she's still part of our family, even though she's not here anymore. Dad says families can grow bigger without forgetting the people who came before." Alexandra knelt down to Lily's level, carefully setting the drawing aside so she could pull the child into a tight hug. "This is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever given me," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you. Thank you for letting me be part of your family, for sharing your dad with me, for teaching me what love actually looks like." Lily hugged her back, then pulled away slightly to look at Alexandra seriously. "Are you scared?" she asked. "About getting married?" "A little," Alexandra admitted. "Not about marrying your dad. But about saying the promises in front of everyone. About making sure I'm good enough to be your mom." Lily considered this with the wisdom of someone much older. "You're already good enough," she said. "You saved me from the falling scaffolding. You built the foundation so kids like me could learn. You let me call you mom even when it's probably weird because you're not really my mom yet. That's more than good enough." The simplicity of the statement somehow made it more profound. Alexandra kissed Lily's forehead and stood up, taking the child's hand. "Okay," she said. "Let's go get married." They walked together to the lobby, where perhaps 60 people had gathered: Marcus's family, Alexandra's few remaining relatives, board members from the foundation, some of the families from the robotics program, and David the program coordinator who had become a close friend. Small and intimate and perfect. Marcus stood at the front beside the officiant, wearing a suit that was probably the nicest thing he owned, his eyes locked on the door where Alexandra and Lily would enter. When he saw his daughter walking Alexandra down the aisle because they had decided together that this was how it should be, his expression transformed into something so full of love and gratitude that several people in the audience started crying before the ceremony even began. Lily walked Alexandra all the way to the front, then hugged her once more before going to sit with Marcus's mother in the front row. Marcus took Alexandra's hands, and the officiant began speaking about love and commitment and the beautiful complexity of families formed not just by biology but by choice. But when it came time for the vows, Marcus and Alexandra had written their own. Marcus spoke first, his voice steady despite the emotion behind it. "Alexandra, a year ago I made a choice to ask for something worthwhile instead of something valuable. I asked you to help my daughter, and you did. But you did so much more than that. You saved Lily's life. You built a foundation that's changing hundreds of children's futures. You taught me that it's possible to love again without betraying the memory of the person I loved first." He paused, gathering himself. I promise to love you with the same devotion I give to Lily. I promise to support your work with the foundation and celebrate every child whose life you change. I promise to remind you, every day, that you're not the person you used to be, that you've become someone remarkable and kind and worthy of all the love I have to give. And I promise to build a life with you where our daughter, both our daughter now, can grow up knowing that love doesn't divide, it multiplies. Then it was Alexandra's turn. She had spent weeks writing and rewriting her vows, trying to capture everything she felt, but standing there with Marcus's hands in hers and Lily watching from the front row, the prepared words felt inadequate. So she spoke from her heart instead. Marcus, a year ago I was drowning in a life that looked successful but felt empty. I had money and power and control, but I didn't have anything that actually mattered. Then you walked into my crisis with your tools and your expertise and your quiet dignity, and you showed me what strength really looks like. Her voice broke slightly, but she continued. You gave up a career you loved for your daughter. You accepted humiliating terms for a bet because Lily needed something you couldn't otherwise provide. You let me into your family even though I was the person who had tried to degrade you. You taught me that actual courage isn't about never falling, it's about knowing when to come down for someone else. Alexandra squeezed his hands. I promise to love Lily like she's my own, to honor Sarah's memory by being the best second mother I can be, to support your work and your dreams the way you've supported mine. I promise to remember every day that this family is the most valuable thing I will ever have. And I promise that when you fall, I'll be there to catch you, because that's what love does. The officiant spoke the traditional words then, the ones about sickness and health and for better or worse. Marcus and Alexandra exchanged rings. Alexandra's was simple silver to match Marcus's, no expensive diamonds, just a band that represented commitment and choice. And when the officiant finally said the words "you may kiss," the kiss that followed felt like a promise made real, like everything they had built together crystallized into a single moment of perfect understanding. The audience erupted in applause and cheers, but Alexandra and Marcus barely heard them. They were looking at each other, seeing their past and their present and their future all at once, understanding that they had found something rare and precious and worth every sacrifice it had taken to get here. The reception was held in the Foundation's workshop area, transformed with tables and catering and a small space for dancing. Children from the robotics program had created centerpieces using their engineering skills, small robots that moved and lights that flashed and designs that made every table unique. Lily gave a speech that made everyone cry, talking about how her dad had taught her that love meant sacrifice and how Alexandra had taught her that people could change. But the moment that defined everything came late in the evening, after the food and the toasts and the dancing. The children had been given free rein of the workshop equipment, and they were building and creating and filling the space with the sounds of learning and discovery. Marcus and Alexandra stood together watching them, his arm around her waist, her head on his shoulder. Look what we made, Alexandra said quietly. Not just the foundation. This whole life. This family. Marcus kissed the top of her head. We made it together. All three of us. Lily appeared then, tugging on both their hands. Come see what we built, she said with excitement. Sophia and me and 3 other kids. It's a mini version of the robot Sarah. 4 smaller spaces. Come see. They followed their daughter into the crowd of children, letting themselves be pulled into explanations and demonstrations and the pure joy of young minds creating. And Alexandra felt herself becoming part of this community, not as a wealthy donor or a foundation director, but as Lily's mom, as Marcus's wife, as someone who belonged here because of who she was rather than what she could provide. Later that night, after the reception ended and the last guest departed, after Lily had fallen asleep in the car on the way home and been carried to bed still wearing her blue dress, Marcus and Alexandra stood together in their living room. Tomorrow they would leave for a short honeymoon, just 3 days because they couldn't leave Lily for longer and didn't want to anyway. But tonight was about being home, being family, being complete. Thank you, Marcus said suddenly. For everything. For loving us. For becoming who you are now instead of staying who you were. Alexandra looked at this man who had taught her everything worth knowing, and she smiled. I should be thanking you, she said. For refusing my original bet. For asking for something that mattered. For showing me that broken wings can still teach others how to fly. The words hung between them, truth and poetry combined. Then Marcus pulled her close and kissed her again, and in that kiss was every promise they had made and every promise they would keep, every falling and every rising, every moment of choosing love over pride. They stood together in the quiet house, Lily sleeping in the next room, the foundation waiting for Monday, their life stretching before them full of possibility. And Alexandra understood that this was the happy ending that had seemed impossible a year ago, not because anything was perfect, but because they had learned that love wasn't about perfection. It was about showing up and trying and choosing each other every single day. The helper robot drawing hung in the hallway now, moved from Alexandra's office to their home where it belonged. And sometimes, late at night when Alexandra couldn't sleep, she would stand in front of it and remember the woman she used to be. The woman who made cruel bets and practiced expressions and confused power with worth. That woman felt like someone from another lifetime. Someone Alexandra barely recognized but didn't entirely regret, because that woman's choices had led here, to this family, to this life, to this understanding that the only thing worth holding onto was the people you loved and the chance to make the world better for someone else. Marcus joined her in the hallway one of those nights, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "You okay?" he asked quietly. "Better than okay," Alexandra said. "I was just thinking about how far we've come. From that convenience store to here. From who I was to who I am now." Marcus turned her to face him. "You know what I think?" he said. "I think you were always capable of being this person. You just needed someone to show you it was safe to be vulnerable, that falling wasn't the same as failing, that coming down from your tower didn't mean losing everything." Alexandra kissed him softly. "And you needed someone to show you it was possible to love again without betraying the memory of the person you loved first." "We saved each other," Marcus said simply. "All three of us. We fell together and we caught each other, and we built something better than anything we could have built alone." In the morning, Lily would wake up calling Alexandra Mom without hesitation. They would have breakfast together as a family, would pack for their short honeymoon, would begin the next chapter of their lives. The foundation would continue growing, reaching more children, creating more opportunities, proving that talent combined with access could change the world. But standing in that hallway in the middle of the night, Marcus and Alexandra holding each other while their daughter slept peacefully in the next room, they understood that they had already found what they had been searching for without knowing they were searching. They had found home. They had found family. They had found the truth that strength wasn't about never falling, it was about knowing when to come down for someone else, when to catch and be caught, when to choose love over everything else that seemed important but ultimately didn't matter at all. The homeless little boy who had counted pennies in that convenience store a year ago had been helped by Lily's scholarship, enrolled in the Foundation's programs, and was now thriving with access to resources he never would have had otherwise. His mother had found work through connections made at the Foundation. They were building a better life, one opportunity at a time, because someone had decided that helping children mattered more than protecting their ego. And that was the real ending, Alexandra thought. Not the wedding or the promises or the happy family they had become. The real ending was in the ripples, in the hundreds of children whose lives would be different because a convenience store clerk had refused money and asked for something worthwhile instead. In the families who would be stronger because their children had access to opportunity. In the future engineers and inventors and problem solvers who would build things that helped people, carrying forward the lesson that talent without access was wasted potential, but talent with support could change the world. Marcus and Alexandra returned to bed, holding each other in the darkness, and they slept the sleep of people who knew they had found what mattered. And when morning came, when Lily ran into their room shouting that it was honeymoon day and they had to hurry, when they began the next chapter of their unlikely, impossible, beautiful life together, they carried with them the knowledge that love multiplied rather than divided, that families grew in ways that honored rather than replaced what came before, and that the best thing you could ever build was a life where falling didn't mean failing. It meant finding people who would catch you and rise with you toward something better than anything you could have imagined alone. Thank you for experiencing this journey. If it moved you, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, hit like to support the channel, and check the description for more stories where broken people find their way back to wholeness. Subscribe to join this community of believers in second chances, because we all deserve the opportunity to fall and rise again, to be caught and to catch others, to learn that the measure of a life isn't in what we accumulate but in the love we give and receive along the way.